In the old tales of the Slavic people, the forest is not just a landscape. It is a living boundary, a shifting frontier where ordinary life fades away and something far older begins to stir. To step beneath the canopy of those endless trees is to step outside the laws of village and kingdom, to enter a place that remembers the world before humans shaped it. The sounds of daily life do not follow you there. The hammer of the blacksmith, the chatter of markets, the laughter of children, all are silenced. What takes their place is a deep and constant hum, as though the trees themselves breathe. Every twig that snaps underfoot seems louder than it should be. Every gust of wind bends the branches in shapes that feel unnatural, almost intentional. The deeper you go, the more you sense that you are being observed, not by a single creature, but by the forest itself, a sentience vast and unblinking. The Slavic imagination placed its most mysterious and terrifying figures in this environment for a reason. The forest was both sustenance and threat. It provided wood, wild game, herbs, and honey. But it also swallowed travelers whole, hid wolves in its shadows, and stretched on in directions no map could ever fully capture. In this endless in-between, far from the cultivated fields and sacred village hearths, people believed there existed those who did not belong to either world. Neither human nor God, neither benevolent nor purely malevolent, these beings embodied the wilderness itself. Among them, none was more infamous than the ancient witch, Baba Yaga. She was never said to live in the open fields or along a known road. You did not stumble upon her casually. You were drawn into her domain by misfortune, desperation, or destiny. Her presence was marked not first by her figure, but by her home. The image is so strange and enduring that even those unfamiliar with Slavic lore recognize it instantly. A hut, small and crude, but standing not on a foundation of stone or wood. It balances upon two immense scaly legs of a bird, usually described as those of a chicken. The house itself moves. It spins, runs, and sometimes stomps about like a restless guardian. It can turn its door toward or away from you, but never of its own accord. The visitor must know the proper incantation to halt its motion. Without the words, the house is unapproachable, a barricade of endless motion and shifting entrances. This impossible image sets the tone for every encounter with Baba Yaga. You are already in a place where reason bends. The natural becomes unnatural, the homely becomes monstrous. You may call it a hut, but it has agency. It responds to ritual commands. It chooses when to face you, when to lower itself for entry. In the world of the folktales, this hut is not background, it is an active participant. And beyond the hut is something even more unsettling. Encircling her domain is a fence not made of wood or stone, but of human bones. Its pickets are femurs, its gates crafted from rib cages, its locks and hinges set with jawbones and teeth. Upon the posts rest skulls, hollow-eyed but glowing from within with an eerie, supernatural fire. At night, this light is the only illumination in the clearing, the strange torch of the dead marking out her territory. For any traveler, the message is unmistakable. You are no longer in the land of men. You stand at the edge of another realm entirely. The witch herself is described in terms that blur monstrosity and wisdom. She is gaunt and towering, her nose sharp enough to touch the ceiling when she lies down in her hut. Her teeth are iron, sharpened for the explicit purpose of devouring human flesh. In many stories, she grinds the bones of her victims in a mortar as easily as grain. And yet this same figure is sought out by heroes and heroines who require guidance or supernatural aid. She is terrifying, but she is necessary. The paradox is central to her nature. She is both helper and devourer, both guardian and executioner. She flies not on a broom like the Western witches of later imagination, but inside a mortar, steering with a pestle, sweeping away her tracks with a birch broom so that none can follow. She is not simply a crone hidden in the woods. She is a force of time, of hunger, of transition. For the Slavic world, to speak of Baba Yaga was to acknowledge a truth about existence itself. The forest, like life, held both nourishment and destruction. You entered seeking one and risked the other. To knock on her door was to gamble with your very survival, but to avoid her entirely was to deny the possibility of growth, of transformation, of acquiring the hidden wisdom she alone could bestow. The stories place her at the margins for a reason. The margin is where change happens. It is the threshold between the safety of the known and the terror of the unknown. That is her domain, and that is why generation after generation return to her image, repeating it in countless variations, each time reaffirming that the encounter with the witch is not accidental. It is fated. The experience of entering her world is framed through ritual. The incantation to command the hut, the respectful greeting, the recognition of her as grandmother, even by those who tremble before her teeth. These rituals reveal something crucial. Baba Yaga is not chaos embodied. She is governed by laws, though not the laws of men. Hers are older, stricter, and merciless. Complete the impossible tasks she sets before you, and she may grant the gift you seek. Fail, and you will adorn her fence. This duality makes her terrifying, but also consistent. Unlike bandits or tyrants, she does not kill at random. Her cruelty is structured, her violence conditional. This makes her not merely a monster, but an adjudicator. She weighs those who dare to approach her, separating the worthy from the unworthy, the prepared from the unprepared. Her role in Slavic folklore can never be reduced to one note. In some tales, she is an insatiable cannibal, sharpening her teeth on a stone and preparing to feast on lost children. In others, she is a wise matron whose advice and magical tools are the only things standing between a hero and failure. The same mouth that devours may also speak the crucial truth. The same hands that build fences of skulls may also extend a lantern that holds the fire of survival. She does not exist to comfort. She exists to test, to terrify, and to bestow power only upon those who endure her ordeals. It is within this paradox that the figure's endurance lies. Children who heard her tales by the fire learned that the world is not neatly divided between good and evil. They learned that survival often depended not on brute strength, but on wisdom, respect, and cleverness. The child who bowed low, who spoke the proper words, who trusted the guidance of a doll or an animal helper, could succeed where stronger, louder characters failed. Baba Yaga embodied the frightening truth that the world is dangerous, but not arbitrary. To succeed in it, you must be attentive, humble, and cunning. The forest setting underscores this lesson. In Slavic villages, the boundary between the cultivated field and the dark woods was immediate. Children knew that beyond a few hundred paces from the huts, the world changed. Wolves prowled there, spirits lingered. Every rustle in the underbrush carried the threat of the unknown. Baba Yaga's hut, spinning on its legs, marked that liminal zone. It is no accident that so many folk tales begin with someone sent into the forest, forced to face its dangers. The forest was the perfect symbol of uncertainty, of leaving the known world behind. And the witch was its ultimate representative, the one who decided whether you returned or not. Travelers to her hut never arrive unmarked. They are driven by necessity, often by cruelty within their own households. The archetypal heroine Vasilisa is sent by a jealous stepmother into the woods to ask Baba Yaga for fire. The errand is a death sentence disguised as duty, and yet, because Vasilisa carries within her a magical doll gifted by her late mother, she survives. The doll, embodying maternal intuition and inherited wisdom, aids her in completing Baba Yaga's impossible tasks. Through this ordeal, Vasilisa does not merely endure, she transforms. She returns home not just with fire, but with a new authority, a power that enacts justice on those who wronged her. This story became one of the most enduring, precisely because it illustrates the paradoxical role of Baba Yaga. She is both the destroyer who sets the trial and the catalyst for the heroine's growth. What emerges from these countless variations is a figure who cannot be dismissed as a villain alone. She's part of a system of initiation. She embodies the danger necessary for transformation. Without her, heroes and heroines would remain children, safe but powerless. With her, they confront terror, face death, and emerge changed. She is the crucible in which character is forged. That is why her stories never fade. They describe in the language of folklore the timeless truth that to grow, one must pass through darkness, risk destruction, and endure trials that seem impossible. Even the very details of her imagery reinforce this truth. The hut that spins away from you until you speak the correct words is a perfect metaphor for knowledge or opportunity. You cannot force it open. You cannot storm it by violence. You must know the right approach, the secret phrase, the respectful address. This is wisdom disguised as architecture. Likewise, the fence of bones makes explicit the stakes. Failure is not a gentle lesson. It is final, absolute, irreversible. But within that threat lies clarity. You know what you face. You know the cost. It is a landscape of terrifying honesty. When people gathered to tell these tales on long winter nights, they were not simply entertaining themselves. They were passing on instructions for survival, psychological maps disguised as supernatural stories. They taught listeners how to behave when confronted with forces larger than themselves, how to balance fear with courage, how to treat even terrifying powers with respect. Baba Yaga was more than a witch. She was a personification of the wilderness, of the inevitability of death, of the need for wisdom in the face of overwhelming power. From this starting point, her legend grew and spread, shifting with each retelling, but never losing the essential elements. The hut on legs, the fence of bones, the tasks impossible but necessary, the witch who may eat you or may guide you. Each repetition carved the image deeper into the collective memory until Baba Yaga became not just a character, but an archetype. She was the Slavic imagination's embodiment of the dangerous but necessary journey into the unknown. And in every version, she waits in the forest, watching, weighing, ready to test the next traveler who dares approach her impossible home. Among all the details in the folklore of Baba Yaga, none captures the imagination more immediately than her strange, impossible home. The stories always begin the same way. You do not find her first, you find her hut. And it is never described as a hut standing quietly in a clearing like any ordinary cabin. It balances on two massive chicken legs, scaly, featherless, restless. Sometimes the hut runs, sometimes it spins endlessly in a dizzying circle, and sometimes it waits, poised and alert, as though it were a living creature. This image has been repeated so many times that it has become inseparable from her character. Baba Yaga without her chicken-legged hut is almost unthinkable. But what does it mean that her house itself behaves like an animal? The strangeness of the hut is more than a whimsical detail. In Slavic oral tradition, the home is the center of stability. A log cabin, carefully built, is the heart of family life, the seat of warmth and continuity. To twist this most familiar of structures into something monstrous was a deliberate choice. A hut that walks on bird legs is not just unsettling because of its absurdity. It is unsettling because it takes the most ordinary symbol of safety and turns it inside out. The home itself becomes a predator. The threshold you normally cross to enter comfort is now a gate into danger. In this way, the hut becomes a kind of initiation in itself. The visitor must face the uncanny reality that what should be safe is not safe, what should be familiar is strange. This reversal primes them for the ordeal to come. Yet there is also a practical dimension to this image. Anthropologists studying the peoples of northern Eurasia have pointed to actual structures that may have inspired the myth. Among the Sami and other Finno-Ugric groups, small storehouses were often built elevated on the remains of tree stumps, the roots still gripping the ground like claws. From a distance, such structures could easily appear to be standing on legs. Their purpose was entirely practical, keeping food supplies away from animals and snowmelt. But to an unfamiliar traveler, the sight of these little cabins perched on root stumps may have seemed uncanny, otherworldly. The folklore of the region preserved and transformed this site, turning storage huts into the home of a supernatural being. In memory and imagination, the practical became the impossible. The ritual for approaching the hut reinforces its symbolic weight. The stories are unanimous. You cannot simply walk up to the door. The hut is always turned away, its entrance facing the forest. To gain access, you must recite a formula, often preserved in variations but with the same intent. Hut, hut, turn your back to the forest and your front to me. Only then does the hut obey. It groans, it creaks, its legs bend and fold, and it lowers itself to the earth, presenting its door to the visitor. This ritual act makes clear that the hut is a gate, a threshold between two realities. You do not cross it casually. You must know the right words. You must perform the correct act. It is both guardian and passage. To enter is to commit yourself to whatever lies inside. In this sense, the hut is more than decoration. It is the first test. Heroes and heroines who approach it without knowledge or respect cannot enter. Those who speak the words reveal themselves as seekers, as initiates willing to cross into a different order of reality. This test mirrors countless traditions across the world in which entry into sacred or dangerous places requires special language or ritual. Just as temples required offerings, oracles demanded questions phrased in particular ways, and shrines demanded purification, so Baba Yaga's hut demands the formula that acknowledges its nature. The child hearing the story learns that to approach great power, even terrifying power, you must do so with reverence and precision. But why chicken legs? Why not wolf paws or bear claws, creatures far more suited to Slavic forests? The answer lies in the deep symbolism of birds. Across cultures, birds were seen as liminal beings. They travel between the ground and the sky, between earth and heaven. In Slavic tradition, they also carried associations with the soul. Birds were often believed to be messengers between the living and the dead, their flight an image of passage between worlds. To place a hut on birds' legs was to signal immediately that this was no ordinary dwelling. It was a structure that belonged on the boundary, a place suspended between life and death, the living world and the other world. The bird legs gave it not just mobility, but symbolic location. It did not stand fully in one world or the other. It straddled both. Inside, the hut was described in ways that were equally unsettling. In many stories, the space was impossibly large, greater within than it appeared outside. It contained a massive stove, one large enough to roast human victims. Strange hands without bodies flitted about, serving Baba Yaga as unseen helpers. The air was thick with herbs, smoke, and a scent that was sometimes food, sometimes decay. For the visitor, stepping into this place was stepping out of the normal architecture of life. The inside did not correspond to the outside, and everything about it carried the feeling of distortion, of rules bent. The hut itself was not a building. It was an entity, a presence, as much a part of Baba Yaga as her iron teeth or her flying mortar. In this sense, it functioned as a symbolic threshold. To enter it was to leave behind the human world and step into the other world. Its spinning, its refusal to face you until commanded, its grotesque appearance, all of these emphasized that you were not stepping into a normal home. You were stepping into a liminal chamber, the passage point between the realms of safety and danger, life and death, the ordinary and the supernatural. Folklorists have long pointed out that in many cultures, houses of the dead or structures associated with burial were built in ways that blurred the line between home and tomb. Baba Yaga's hut preserves this ambiguity perfectly. It is at once domestic and terrifying, a place of hearth and a place of death. The image of a house that runs or spins also communicates something deeper about her nature. Stability belongs to the village. A house there is fixed, its foundations tied to the land and to generations of family. Baba Yaga's hut is the opposite. It refuses to stay still. It resists being claimed by any single place. It embodies her freedom from the normal human order. She is not bound by field or fence, by inheritance or kinship. Her house is as wild and unpredictable as she is. To meet her is to abandon the expectation of stability. To seek her wisdom is to accept disorientation. The spinning house mirrors the disorientation of those who dare to enter the forest and seek her aid. The world turns upside down. Directions collapse. Only those who endure can find their footing again. Children hearing about the hut would have felt both fear and fascination. A house with legs is absurd, comical even, but it is also horrifying because it undermines the one thing children rely on most, the stability of home. It was a way for the tale to strike deep into the psyche, to communicate that when you leave the known world, you cannot expect the same comforts. What protects you at home can betray you in the woods. What looks like a cabin may be a trap, but the same hut, approached correctly, could also be the place where you gained the power to return transformed. Archaeological speculation has added another layer to the meaning of the hut. Some researchers suggest that the chicken-legged house may recall ancient burial customs. In parts of northern Eurasia, bodies were sometimes placed in small elevated huts or structures before being committed to the ground. These huts were lifted above the earth to protect them from animals, giving them the appearance of being on stilts or legs. If folk memory of such funerary practices lingered, it could easily have transformed into the image of a hut that not only resembled a bird, but truly lived as one. This interpretation fits perfectly with Baba Yaga's role as guardian of the threshold between life and death. Her hut becomes not only her home, but a symbolic grave, a structure tied to the mysteries of mortality. To enter it is to symbolically die, and to leave it is to be reborn. The tales emphasize this connection. Heroes who pass through the hut undergo ordeals that strip them of their old selves. They perform impossible tasks, face annihilation, and emerge with gifts of fire or wisdom. The hut thus functions as an initiatory chamber, the space in which symbolic death occurs. The bones in the fence reinforce the message. Many have entered and not returned. Only those with the proper courage and wisdom can emerge alive. The spinning, bird-legged hut is not a curiosity. It is a machine of transformation. When folklorists in the 19th century collected these tales, they noted how consistently the hut appeared across regions and retellings. Even when other details changed, the hut endured. It was the visual anchor of Baba Yaga's mythology, the sign that you had stepped into her world. Later artists and composers seized on this image as well. Victor Hartmann's drawing of the hut as a clock inspired Modest Mussorgsky's famous musical piece, The Hut on Fowl's Legs, which thundered with pounding rhythms and jagged notes to convey the terror of the hut's impossible motion. Painters and animators alike found in it the perfect image of the uncanny, a home that should protect, now turned into a monster. The hut's legacy has continued into modern times. Video games, films, and novels depict it stomping across landscapes, looming as an enemy, or appearing as a mysterious quest location. Even stripped from its folkloric roots, the hut carries its power. Its shape alone communicates strangeness, danger, and fascination. To see a house with legs is to know that you are no longer in the ordinary world. You are in the presence of myth. This image, so bizarre and yet so enduring, tells us much about why Baba Yaga herself survived the centuries. A figure this strange could not be erased. The hut guaranteed her memory. Children who might forget the details of a particular tale could not forget the image of the spinning house on legs. It was too strange, too vivid. It demanded retelling. And in each retelling, Baba Yaga returned, waiting inside, sharpening her teeth, ready to test the next visitor. If the hut on chicken legs is the first sign that you have stepped into Baba Yaga's realm, the fence that surrounds it is the second. No ordinary wall of wood or stone marks the edge of her territory. Instead, the barrier is made from the remains of those who came before. Bones rise upright where logs should be, their pale surfaces gleaming in moonlight. Femurs and tibias line up as posts, rib cages bent into arches, skulls mounted at the top like grotesque lanterns. At night, the eyes of those skulls are said to glow with a fire that burns without end, a light not of the living world, but of something stolen from beyond it. For anyone approaching the clearing, this sight is not simply frightening, it is overwhelming. The fence declares in silence what words never could. This is the boundary, where the land of the living ends and another domain begins. The symbolism is brutal in its clarity. A wooden fence keeps animals out. A stone wall marks property lines. But a fence of bones tells you immediately what is at stake. Death itself is the foundation of Baba Yaga's world. She builds with it, decorates with it, illuminates her nights with it. What is horror for humans is furniture for her. In that reversal lies her terrible power. To live among bones is to be untouched by the fear of them. She shows no separation between life and death. For her, the remains of the dead are tools, warnings, trophies, even torches. And for the traveler who sees them, the lesson is clear. Enter, if you dare, but understand that the price of failure is not symbolic. It is written in bone, standing before your eyes. The gate of the fence is even more unsettling. Many stories describe it as constructed from human legs, jointed and bound together, swinging open on a jawbone fitted with sharp teeth. You do not simply open it with a push. To pass through, you are forced to acknowledge the grotesque fact that this barrier is made of what once walked, once ate, once spoke. The gate itself is alive in memory, a collection of pieces of humanity now turned into a threshold. When you pass under it, you are not just crossing into another yard. You are stepping through the remains of predecessors, through the evidence of those who failed. The stories often add one more detail. There is always a post left bare, one skull missing from its perch. Baba Yaga herself points it out. Fail your tasks, and yours will be the skull that fills the gap. This is not abstract menace. It is a countdown, a personal threat waiting to be fulfilled. For a child listening by the fire, this detail strikes with particular force. It is one thing to hear that a monster eats people. It is another to imagine your own head glowing on a fence, your own bones stacked as a warning. The empty post personalizes the horror. Every listener imagines themselves in that missing place. Every hero or heroine entering her yard is marked as a potential addition. This simple device turns the fence into more than a backdrop. It becomes a participant in the drama, a reminder that the stakes are not metaphorical. The fence also operates as a symbol of transition. In many cultures, death is marked by thresholds. The gate to a cemetery, the doorway of a tomb, the line between consecrated ground and ordinary earth. Baba Yaga's fence serves the same purpose. To step through it is to leave behind the world of the living and enter the world of the dead, or at least the liminal zone where the dead and living mingle. It functions like the boundary stones of sacred sites, the rivers that divide lands of the living from lands of the underworld, the bridges that cross from one existence to another. To cross her bone fence is to accept that you have left the safety of human society. You have entered the other world, and its laws are no longer those you knew. In folklore, bones themselves carry layered meanings. They are what remain when flesh decays, the enduring part of the body. They can be terrifying as reminders of mortality, but they also carry associations with permanence, with the indestructible essence of life. In some traditions, bones are linked to resurrection, to the idea that life can return as long as bones remain intact. Baba Yaga's fence, then, is not only a threat, it is also a declaration of her role as mistress of this cycle. She alone commands the border where death becomes life again, where remains are not final, but tools in her hand. The fire burning in the skulls is not just decoration, it is the fire of knowledge, of transformation, of the other world's energy. The very objects that should be silent and empty are animated under her control. This gruesome wall also reflects the ancient practice of marking boundaries with bones and skulls, especially in shamanic and animistic traditions. Hunters displayed animal skulls as offerings or trophies, believing the spirit of the animal lingered in the bones. Burial grounds often placed skulls on posts as warnings or guardians. Baba Yaga's fence takes these practices to their extreme, humanizing them and magnifying their terror. The bones become a declaration that she is not just hunter or guardian, but judge, executioner, and collector. She is the one who turns death into architecture. Yet for all its horror, the fence is not truly meant to keep people out. The stories are clear. The hero or heroine always enters. The fence is a symbol, not a barricade. Its purpose is not to stop you, but to announce the stakes. It is there to remind you that once you cross, you are in a realm where the ordinary rules no longer apply. It is the line you must cross to begin the trial. In that way, the fence is the perfect initiation marker. It frightens, it warns, but it also invites. The empty post waits, daring you to risk filling it. And the fire in the skulls lights the way forward, deeper into danger. This blend of horror and guidance is central to Baba Yaga's character. She does not simply kill for the sake of cruelty. She presents choices, offers trials. The fence, like the hut, embodies this paradox. It is both terrifying and necessary. Without it, the journey would lack weight. With it, every step inside feels like a gamble with death. And yet, it is only by entering that the seeker can hope to find the fire, the wisdom, or the magical tool they need. The fence makes sure that this truth is understood before the first word is spoken to the witch. The image of glowing skulls has endured far beyond Slavic folklore. It appears in countless illustrations, paintings, and adaptations. Modern fantasy often borrows the motif, surrounding dark castles or necromancers' lairs with skulls alight with eerie flame. But in the original context, the meaning was sharper. It was not only decoration, but the very face of death turned into illumination. Light normally signifies safety, guidance, and hope. But here, the light comes from hollow sockets, from reminders of mortality. To carry such a skull, as Vasilisa does when Baba Yaga finally grants her fire, is to carry death's light, a power that judges and destroys. The fence introduces this motif, and the story later develops it into one of the most striking symbols of justice in folklore. Scholars have often connected the fence with broader Indo-European traditions. Across mythologies, bones and skulls frequently mark the presence of the sacred or the terrifying. Celtic cairns of skulls, Norse displays of enemy heads, the ossuaries of Christian Europe, all of these reflect the same instinct to use the human body as a boundary marker. Baba Yaga's fence is part of this larger pattern, but it is more intimate. It is not about armies or communities. It is about individual visitors. Each skull was once someone who stood where you stand. Each bone once carried someone who sought what you now seek. The personal nature of this warning makes it more haunting than any battlefield trophy. For the audience of these tales, especially children, the fence would have been the moment when the story turned serious. The hut might have inspired curiosity, even laughter at its absurd legs. But the fence silenced that laughter. Bones are not whimsical. They are reminders of death everyone could understand. And the glowing skulls, impossible yet believable in the logic of folklore, made the scene unforgettable. In this way, The fence performed the same role in the story that it performed in the narrative world. It marked the transition. The playful gave way to the deadly. The curious became the terrifying. Once the fence was described, everyone listening knew the real trial was about to begin. The way the fence frames Baba Yaga herself is also significant. She does not appear suddenly in the woods leaping out at travelers. She sits inside her domain within her skeletal barrier. The visitor must approach, must see the warning, must choose to enter despite it. This positions her not as a random predator, but as a figure of deliberate confrontation. The fence ensures that those who face her do so knowingly. They are not ambushed, they are tested, and their choice to step inside is the beginning of the test. The enduring power of this image cannot be overstated. From oral tales to modern retellings, the fence of bones continues to define Baba Yaga's mythos. It is the line between our world and hers, the grotesque boundary that makes the encounter unavoidable and unforgettable. Without it, her hut might seem merely strange, her role merely that of another forest witch. With it, she becomes something more. She becomes the mistress of death's threshold, the one whose home is not simply in the forest, but on the edge of life itself. The fence is her declaration, her warning, and her invitation, all in one. When people first hear that Baba Yaga flies through the air, their minds jump to familiar images of broom-riding witches drawn from Western fairy tales. But the details of her flight are stranger, older, and far more symbolic than the simplified version we know from later European lore. In the Slavic imagination, she does not perch on a broomstick like a crooked caricature. Instead, she travels in a mortar, the same heavy vessel used daily in households to grind grain, seeds, and herbs. She sits inside this solid, bowl-shaped tool, vast enough in the stories to carry her whole body. With one hand, she pushes herself forward using a pestle as though rowing through the air. With the other, she sweeps away her tracks using a broom made of birch. It is a bizarre image, at once comic and terrifying, mundane and supernatural. But in this strangeness lies a great deal of meaning. The mortar and pestle were among the most important tools of Slavic domestic life. Every household depended on them. They were used to grind wheat into flour for bread, to crush herbs into medicine, to prepare the very sustenance of survival. They were the instruments of transformation, turning raw material into nourishment, bitter plants into healing remedies. In the hands of ordinary women, they sustained life. In the hands of Baba Yaga, they subvert it. She does not grind grain for bread. She grinds bones. She does not use the pestle to prepare medicine. She wields it as a weapon, a rudder, a staff of power. The domestic becomes monstrous. The tools of life become tools of death. This inversion is central to her identity. She is not outside the human world. She is its mirror image, twisted and unleashed. The choice of these particular tools also underscores her association with women's knowledge. In most villages, it was women who used the mortar and pestle daily. They knew the recipes, the herbs, the correct proportions. This knowledge was practical, but it was also viewed as mysterious by those who did not wield it. The grinding of plants into potions, the preparation of poultices and teas could easily slip into the realm of magic in the imagination. The same tool that produced bread could also produce poisons. The same vessel that fed children could also conceal deadly powders. Baba Yaga embodies this ambiguity. She takes the ordinary, female-centered technology of the household and turns it into a vehicle of supernatural power. The broom completes this triad of strange tools. Like the mortar and pestle, it was a simple household item, used every day to sweep dirt from the floor. In Baba Yaga's hands, it does not clean the house but erases her very presence from the world. As she flies, she sweeps away her tracks, leaving no trace behind. This detail reveals her liminal status. She moves through the world of humans, but she is not bound to it. She leaves no footprints, no signs of her passage. She cannot be followed unless she chooses to be. The broom is not only concealment, it is control over memory. over evidence. She appears when she wishes and disappears just as easily. For those who hear her stories, this makes her even more terrifying. She is not simply hidden in the forest. She is present and absent at once, an unpredictable force who might be anywhere but cannot be tracked. The broom, like the mortar and pestle, also carries symbolic weight. To sweep is to restore order, to clear away what is unwanted. In ritual traditions, sweeping often meant more than cleaning. It meant banishing spirits, removing negative energy, preparing a space for sacred action. Baba Yaga's sweeping, then, is not random. It is an act of erasure, a magical cleansing that denies pursuit. She not only hides her path, but cleanses the very world of her presence. She exists apart, unbound by the traces that humans leave behind. The implication is clear. She is not truly of our world. She passes through it, but does not belong to it. This combination of mortar, pestle, and broom sets Baba Yaga apart from other witches in European folklore. The broom rider of Western tales became a stock figure, stripped of depth and transformed into Halloween decoration. Baba Yaga, however, retains her strangeness because her tools are so deeply tied to domestic life, yet so thoroughly transformed. Every listener in a Slavic household knew what a mortar looked like, how heavy it was, how essential. To imagine it flying through the sky with a witch inside was to imagine the most ordinary object suddenly revealed as something terrifying. This blending of the everyday and the supernatural is precisely what makes her memorable. The horror does not come from the exotic, but from the familiar made monstrous. It is worth considering too how these tools relate to her identity as a guardian of thresholds. The mortar is a vessel, an enclosed space that transforms whatever is placed within it. To sit in it is to sit in a place of transformation, to embody that role. The pestle is both instrument and weapon, shaping whatever it touches. The broom erases the traces of the past, clearing the way for the new. Together, these tools make Baba Yaga not only a destroyer, but also a figure of process, of change, of transition. She does not simply kill. She grinds, shapes, conceals, and recreates. Her tools announce that she is not a static figure, but one who enacts transformation, whether through terror or through gift. Legends also describe her using the mortar in more violent ways. In some tales, she pursues her victims by grinding the very earth behind them, the pestle pounding the ground like thunder. The mortar becomes not only a vehicle, but a weapon of cosmic force, echoing the drumbeats of ritual, the pounding rhythms of creation myths. To flee from her is to feel the very ground crushed in her wake. This violent imagery connects her not just to household work, but to the elemental forces of destruction and creation. She wields the instruments of women's daily labor as cosmic tools, magnifying their importance until they shape the world itself. The image of her tools has resonated so strongly that they have become shorthand for her identity. Artists, writers, and game designers who wish to evoke Baba Yaga often depict her in a mortar, pestle in hand, broom trailing behind. Even when other details shift, these objects remain constant. They are her signature as much as her hut and her bone fence. They are the things that mark her as Baba Yaga rather than any other witch. And they endure because they contain within them a paradox that defines her. The ordinary transformed into the supernatural, the domestic turned into the cosmic, the tool of life becoming the tool of death. To the communities that first told her stories, this paradox would have felt both threatening and strangely familiar. Women who used these tools daily knew their power. Grinding grain was not simply labor, it was the difference between hunger and survival. Sweeping a hearth was not just cleaning, it was protection against filth and disorder. In Baba Yaga, these powers were amplified, twisted, and projected onto the figure of a witch who lived outside society. She was what happened when household power became untamed, when the knowledge of women slipped beyond control. Her tools carried this memory into every retelling, reminding listeners that the boundary between ordinary life and magic was not as wide as they might think. The broom, in particular, ties her to wider European traditions. In many cultures, brooms were associated with fertility rituals, with sweeping away old energy before planting, with jumping over broomsticks in marriage rites. They were tools of renewal as well as cleaning. Baba Yaga's broom, then, is not only concealment, but also renewal of a darker sort. She sweeps away not only her tracks, but the old order of those who fail her. She clears space for the new, even if that newness comes through destruction. In this way, her broom links her to cycles of death and rebirth, echoing her larger role as guardian of the threshold. Even the materials of her broom carry meaning. Birch was considered a tree of purification in Slavic traditions, used to sweep out not just dust, but unwanted spirits. To give her a birch broom was to reinforce her role as one who controls presence and absence, who decides what remains and what is removed. She sweeps herself out of the world, and she sweeps others into death. The same action holds both powers. The mortar and pestle also connect her to deeper layers of myth. Across Eurasia, these tools were not just culinary implements, but ritual ones. Shamans used them to grind hallucinogenic plants, to prepare mixtures for altered states, to enter the other world. In this sense, Baba Yaga's mortar is not only a vehicle across space, but across realities. To sit in it is to cross the boundary from one world to another, propelled by the pestle, concealed by the broom. The shaman's tools become the witch's vehicle, linking her directly to the ancient practices of traversing between worlds. For listeners, the imagery left no doubt about her nature. She was not simply a woman who lived in the woods. She was a figure whose very tools declared her dominion over life and death, over presence and absence, over transformation itself. To imagine her in the sky, mortar gliding, pestle steering, broom sweeping, was to imagine the inversion of ordinary life, the unleashing of powers that usually remained hidden in the safety of the hearth. She was the nightmare of domestic tools given independent, terrifying agency. This is why her tools endure in every retelling. They are not random details, but essential parts of her identity. They speak to her role as liminal figure, as destroyer and creator, as embodiment of the uncanny, and they ensure that even when she disappears into the night, sweeping her traces behind her, the memory of her flight remains vivid, unforgettable, and haunting for those who dared to hear her story. When the stories describe Baba Yaga soaring through the air, carried in her mortar and sweeping her tracks away with her broom, they are not only portraying a strange flight of fancy, they are showing her as a being who does not belong fully to the ground. The hut and the bone fence tie her to the earth, to death and decay, but her flight reminds us that she is not bound to a single realm. She can move where she pleases, crossing the boundaries between earth and sky just as easily as she crosses those between life and death. In the Slavic imagination, flight was never an ordinary thing. To rise above the ground was to step into the realm of the gods, of the sun, of forces larger than human understanding. Baba Yaga's flight placed her among them, an ancient reminder that she was not simply another witch crouching in the forest, but a figure with command over the elements themselves. The stories reinforce this power by surrounding her with servants who embody the very cycle of time. In the most famous tales, as the heroine approaches Baba Yaga's domain, she encounters three mysterious riders. The first is dressed all in white, riding a pale horse, and his passing brings the light of dawn. The second is red, blazing on a scarlet steed, and his passage fills the sky with the heat and brilliance of noon. The third is black, a shadow on a dark horse, and as he gallops past, night falls. These three are not men at all, but the personifications of daybreak, midday, and midnight. They are described as the faithful servants of Baba Yaga. The implication could not be clearer. She does not merely live in a corner of the forest. She commands time itself. The turning of the day, the rising and setting of light, the passage of hours are all at her disposal. For a listener, this is one of the most striking details in the lore. It elevates her far above the level of a local witch. No simple forest spirit could claim such attendance. To have the cycle of the sun and the darkness under her control is to exist at the level of the cosmic. It transforms her from a devourer of children into something more unsettling, a force of nature. She does not kill because she is hungry alone. She kills because she is part of the very rhythm of existence, the cycle of life and death that none can escape. To approach her hut is not merely to meet an old woman with terrible teeth. It is to come face to face with the embodiment of time, and no mortal can resist time. The association of Baba Yaga with time places her in a long line of mythological figures who embody natural cycles. The Greeks imagined the Moirai, the Fates, as women who spun, measured, and cut the thread of human lives. The Norse told of the Norns, who wove destiny at the roots of the world tree. Slavic folklore preserved its own version of this archetype, with Baba Yaga as the figure who tests, who weighs, who judges, all while the passage of hours marches under her command. To survive her hut is to survive an encounter with time itself. To fail is to be consumed and reduced to bone like all who have come before. The riders also reveal another layer of meaning. They show that Baba Yaga is not a chaotic figure outside of order. She is the order. Dawn, noon, and midnight occur in perfect sequence, and they do so in her service. This suggests that her cruelty is not random, but structured. Her impossible tasks, her tests, her judgments all follow a rhythm as inexorable as the rising of the sun. In this way, the folk tales teach that the trials of life are not senseless punishments. They are part of the pattern. They come as surely as morning follows night. Baba Yaga, terrifying as she is, enforces that truth. The connection to time is also underscored by the liminality of her very existence. She lives on the border of the forest, on the edge of life and death. Her house spins between facing the forest and facing the visitor. Her broom sweeps away traces as though erasing the past. Everything about her is caught between moments, between worlds. To see her as the mistress of time makes sense, for she exists where one thing turns into another, day into night, life into death, safety into danger, childhood into adulthood. Her stories are initiation stories precisely because she represents that moment of change. She is the hinge on which transformation turns. Her flight through the air also connects her to weather, to storms, to the elements. Many cultures associated flying figures with thunder, with lightning, with the wild hunt of ghostly riders who swept across the sky in the dead of winter. Baba Yaga, trailing her broom and pestle, may have been a local manifestation of this same archetype, a storm spirit transformed into a witch in exile. When villagers heard the howling of winds in the trees or the sudden crack of thunder, they may have thought of her mortar grinding across the sky, her broom sweeping the clouds aside. This association makes her not only a mistress of time, but also of weather, another reminder that she embodies the untamable forces of nature. The glowing skulls on her fence deepen this connection. They burn not with ordinary fire, but with an eerie, eternal flame, a light that never goes out. Fire itself is another cycle, consuming and renewing, destroying and giving life. To carry one of those skulls is to carry a piece of elemental power, fire distilled from death. It is both illumination and destruction, both gift and curse. In this way, Baba Yaga provides not only the rhythm of time, but the fuel that drives it. The light that destroys her enemies is the same light that guides her chosen hero home. She is never one thing or the other. She is always both. The tales of Vasilisa make this explicit. The young heroine, cast into the forest to die, survives only because she respects Baba Yaga's power and passes her tests. At the end, she is granted a skull aflame, a piece of time and death captured in her hands. With it, she returns to her stepmother's house, and the fire consumes those who wronged her. The symbolism is unmistakable. Vasilisa has endured the passage through time, through death, through initiation, and returned with a power greater than herself. She has been transformed, not in spite of Baba Yaga, but because of her. The mistress of time has allowed her to pass, and in doing so, made her stronger. For the Slavic peoples who lived with long, harsh winters and fleeting summers, time was not an abstract concept. It was survival. The cycle of planting, harvest, and hunger shaped their lives. To place time in the hands of Baba Yaga was to acknowledge that these cycles were terrifying, dangerous, and beyond human control. She was winter personified, the devouring cold that killed, but also the passage that led to spring, to rebirth, to survival. Her servants, the white, red, and black riders, were not just colourful details, but essential truths. Life was ruled by these shifts, and Baba Yaga commanded them. Even her very appearance fits this role. Descriptions of her emphasize her immense age, her iron teeth, her skeletal figure. She is a body ravaged by time, a woman who has outlasted centuries, who has become something more than human by surviving beyond all ordinary limits. Her hunger is the hunger of time itself, consuming all without pity. Her wisdom is the wisdom of age, harsh and uncompromising. To meet her is to meet the inevitability of aging, of decay, of the turning of the world. And yet, as the tales show, she is not only destruction. Those who endure her trials emerge wiser, stronger, renewed. Time, too, grants not only death, but growth. Baba Yaga embodies this paradox perfectly. Her mastery over time and nature is why she could never be confined to the role of a mere villain. A monster might be slain, avoided, or tricked. Baba Yaga cannot be destroyed because she is not a single being. She is an archetype, a personification of cycles that continue whether humans will them or not. She is the dawn, the noon, the midnight. She is the storm that passes and returns. She is the winter that freezes and the spring that follows. The stories make this clear not by saying it outright, but by showing her servants riding across the sky, by depicting her flying above the treetops, by making her house spin as though caught in the endless turn of seasons. She is motion itself, the ceaseless rhythm of change. For children who heard her tales, this understanding seeped in quietly. They may not have thought of time in abstract terms, but they knew that seasons changed, that nights fell quickly, that mornings followed with new tasks. They knew that winters were deadly, that harvests were brief, that death came for the old, and sometimes the young. Baba Yaga was all of these truths wrapped into a single terrifying figure. She was the face of inevitability, given teeth and a hut, and placed in the woods where imagination could find her. And she was unforgettable, because no child could forget the fear of darkness or the relief of dawn. Baba Yaga commanded both. The image of her in the sky trailing her broom continues to fascinate in modern times because it touches this primal fear and fascination. It is not the cartoonish witch of Halloween who grins on a broomstick. It is something stranger, older, and more disturbing. A woman whose flight represents the turning of the world, the relentless passage of time, the storm that no one can escape. Even now, to imagine her overhead is to feel small, to feel caught in forces larger than oneself. That is why the tales endure. Baba Yaga does not just haunt the forest. She haunts the sky, the clock, the seasons. She is everywhere time moves, everywhere nature shifts, and her shadow falls across all who live within those rhythms. Among the many travelers who enter Baba Yaga's forest, none has left a deeper mark on the folklore than the young girl known as Vasilisa. Her story was told and retold across countless villages, and when Russian folklorists finally collected the tales in the 19th century, hers stood out as the one that carried the most complete encounter with Baba Yaga. It begins not with the witch herself, but with the small details of family life, details that every listener would have recognized. A mother, a father, a household, and the death that throws all of it into imbalance. Vasilisa's mother dies when the girl is still young, but before she passes, she gives her daughter a gift. It is a simple wooden doll, small enough to fit in her pocket, but charged with something far greater. The mother tells her to feed it when she eats and to turn to it for advice whenever she is in trouble. The doll, in its way, carries the mother's blessing, her intuition, her protection beyond the grave. For a child hearing this story, the detail is immediately gripping. A doll is an object of play, a companion. But here, it becomes something far more serious, a vessel of survival, a link to maternal wisdom. After the mother's death, the father remarries, as fathers often do in folk tales. The stepmother arrives with her own daughters, and the household shifts into a familiar pattern of cruelty. Vasilisa is made to work endlessly, belittled, despised for her beauty and her gentle nature. Her stepsisters taunt her, her stepmother drives her with impossible demands, and she survives only because of the doll. Each night, when the tasks are too much, she gives it a crumb of food, whispers her troubles, and while she sleeps, the doll comes alive. It completes her chores, weeds the garden, carries the water, cleans the house. In this way, Vasilisa endures, her light not dimmed by cruelty, her beauty growing even as her tormentors try to break her. The turning point comes when the stepmother, determined to rid herself of the girl once and for all, seizes on a plan that seems ordinary, but hides malice. She moves the family to the edge of a deep forest, the very forest known to belong to Baba Yaga. One evening, she extinguishes every lamp and candle in the house, leaving them in total darkness. With feigned helplessness, she declares that someone must go fetch fire from their only neighbor. And their only neighbor, of course, is the witch in the woods. The stepsisters refuse in exaggerated terror, and the burden falls on Vasilisa. She is sent into the forest not with hope of success, but with the certainty that she will not return. This is where the tale moves into the territory of initiation, of symbolic death. Vasilisa sets out into the dark with nothing but her doll in her pocket. The forest grows thicker, the sounds stranger, and her fear greater with each step. Yet the doll guides her, whispering directions, steadying her heart. The journey itself takes on an otherworldly character, marked by encounters that are not with animals or bandits, but with time itself. As she walks, a rider in white passes her, and suddenly dawn breaks. Later, a rider in red rides past, and the sun rises to its zenith. Finally, as she nears her destination, a rider in black gallops into the distance, and night falls instantly. These are not men but cosmic servants, and by witnessing them, Vasilisa understands that she has entered a place where the forces of the world take shape as figures, where time itself rides past her on horseback. At last, she comes to the clearing. The hut stands on its chicken legs, spinning in its circle, the bone fence glowing with the eyes of skulls. She speaks the incantation, commanding the hut to face her, and it lowers itself to allow her in. Inside, the air is thick, the stove immense, and disembodied hands move about, tending to the household in eerie silence. Then comes the roar of the trees, the howl of the wind, and the witch herself descends in her mortar. She sniffs the air and cries out that she smells human flesh. Vasilisa steps forward, bows, and answers with the words her doll has taught her, respectful, calm, calling Baba Yaga grandmother, never betraying her fear. Baba Yaga agrees to give her fire, but not freely. She must earn it by completing tasks that no mortal could hope to finish. She is told to sweep the yard, cook the food, and, most impossibly, to separate a mountain of grain from a mixture of dirt and poppy seeds, one grain at a time, before nightfall. Left alone, Vasilisa despairs, but she takes out her doll, feeds it, and asks for help. The doll tells her not to worry, to sleep, for the morning will be wiser than the evening. And while Vasilisa rests, the doll calls upon ants and birds and unseen helpers to sort the pile, completing the impossible task before dawn. When Baba Yaga returns, she is astonished and angered to find the work done, but bound by her own rules, she cannot punish Vasilisa. She sets new tasks, each as impossible as the last, and each night the doll completes them. Through it all, Vasilisa obeys the wisdom given to her, to be respectful, to ask only what is permitted, to show humility and restraint. Finally, Baba Yaga offers her the chance to ask questions. Vasilisa inquires only about the riders she saw. Baba Yaga answers, the white was her bright day, the red her red sun, the black her dark midnight. She then demands to know why Vasilisa has not asked about the strange hands in the hut. Vasilisa bows and replies that it is because Baba Yaga herself said it was not good to know too much. This answer pleases the witch, for it shows wisdom. Knowledge must be respected, and curiosity must have limits. At last, Baba Yaga grants her the fire. She plucks one of the skulls from the fence, its eye sockets blazing, and gives it to her on a stick. Vasilisa takes it home, though the doll whispers to her not to discard it, even when its terrible gaze frightens her. When she returns to her stepmother's cottage, the skull's burning eyes fix upon the cruel women who sent her into the woods. They cannot escape its light. By morning, the fire has consumed them, leaving only ashes. Vasilisa herself is unharmed. She buries the skull in the earth, ensuring it harms no others, and moves on to a new life, free of her tormentors. This tale is remembered as one of the clearest demonstrations of Baba Yaga's role as tester, as judge, as giver of deadly gifts. Vasilisa does not triumph by strength or by trickery. She triumphs by obedience to wisdom, by humility, by respect, and by trust in her intuition embodied in the doll. The fire she carries back is not only literal, it is the fire of transformation, the proof that she has endured death's trial and returned stronger. The stepmother and stepsisters are destroyed not by Vasilisa's hand, but by the judgment carried in that skull. Justice comes not through revenge, but through the impartial fire of the other world. For those who first told the story, the lesson was clear. To survive Baba Yaga is to honor the wisdom of ancestors, to respect limits, to endure trials without complaint, and to trust in inner guidance. For listeners, especially girls, the story was a roadmap for resilience in a world that could be cruel. Vasilisa emerges not as a victim, but as someone tempered by ordeal, her gentle nature strengthened into wisdom. Baba Yaga is not her enemy, so much as her crucible. Without the witch's trials, she could never have transformed. Without the skull's fire, she could never have been freed. The tale also reveals Baba Yaga's paradoxical role. She threatens to eat Vasilisa, sets her impossible labors, surrounds herself with bones and fire, and yet she gives her exactly what she needs to triumph. She is destroyer and benefactor in the same figure. This is why the story endures. It speaks not only of fear, but of growth, of the necessity of facing death's shadow in order to live fully. Vasilisa's beauty is not simply physical, but spiritual, the beauty of someone who has passed through fire and survived. This pattern, repeated in many variations, shows Baba Yaga at her most complete. The devourer who also gives, the judge who destroys the wicked but rewards the wise. And through Vasilisa's journey, listeners are reminded that even the darkest forest hides not only terror, but the possibility of transformation, if one dares to walk its paths with courage and respect. Among the countless strange details that mark the stories of Baba Yaga, Few are more mysterious than the riders who appear on the forest path leading to her domain. They arrive not as ordinary men, but as personifications of the most fundamental cycles of existence, passing in solemn order, as though to remind the traveller of the world's larger rhythm before they even reach the witch's spinning hut. When Vasilisa walks through the trees, she sees them one by one, first the rider in white, then the rider in red, and finally the rider in black. The tales name them as bright day, red sun, and dark midnight, each bound in service to Baba Yaga. They are more than guardians. They are her timekeepers, her heralds, the moving pillars of the sky itself. To meet them is to glimpse the framework of reality and to understand that the witch who rules this forest is no mere old woman, but a figure who commands the turning of time itself. The first rider appears at dawn. He is clothed all in white from his tunic to his horse, glowing with the faint but steady light that pushes back the shadows. His passage brings the brightness of morning, the breaking of night. To encounter him is to know that the day has begun, that the forest now stands revealed in its early light. In him, listeners could see the promise of renewal, of beginnings, of the daily cycle that allows life to continue. For Vasilisa, frightened in the dark woods, this rider's arrival is both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Dawn does not bring comfort here. It brings the certainty that she has entered the witch's domain, where even the sunrise is not free, but rides at Baba Yaga's command. The second rider blazes forth at noon. His garments are red, his steed scarlet, his presence radiating heat and vitality. He is the fullness of life, the power of the sun at its peak. His passing brings with it the sense of strength, of the world in its most active state. Noon is the moment when shadows are shortest, when labor is at its height, when the day is in full possession of itself. To see him is to be reminded of energy, of fire, of life in its prime. Yet here again, the lesson is sharpened. If this figure of strength rides in service to Baba Yaga, then she herself must be more powerful still. What is most vital in the world bends the knee to her. The third rider arrives as dusk falls. Clad in black, astride a dark horse, he signals the coming of night. With his passing, the forest is swallowed in shadow once again, the light extinguished, the world returned to silence and uncertainty. This rider embodies rest, endings, and death. His presence reminds the listener that all cycles conclude, that even the strongest day must yield to darkness. For the traveller in Baba Yaga's woods, this is the most terrifying of the three, for it means that the safety of vision is gone, and whatever trials await must now be faced in darkness. Together, these three figures form a triad of time: dawn, noon, and midnight. They do not speak, they do not act directly, yet their presence frames the entire encounter with Baba Yaga. They mark the stages of the journey, they set its rhythm, they remind both traveller and listener that everything unfolds within a cosmic order. The fact that they serve Baba Yaga is perhaps the most important detail. It shows that she does not exist outside of time, she exists at its centre, she commands it, directs it, embodies it. To meet her is to confront not only death and danger, but the inevitability of change itself. In a world where agriculture dictated survival, this imagery resonated deeply. The daily cycle of light and dark was more than routine. It was life and death. The dawn brought labor. The noon brought toil under the sun. The night brought rest, but also fear of predators and spirits. These were not abstractions. They were lived realities. To personify them as riders and to place them under the authority of Baba Yaga was to give face to the forces that ruled every village's existence. Children hearing of the riders would have recognized their significance instantly. They had felt the relief of dawn, the heat of noon, the dread of night. To imagine these experiences as figures on horseback made them unforgettable. The number 3 carries symbolic weight as well. Across cultures, triads are associated with completeness, with the balance of beginning, middle, and end. In Slavic lore, as in many Indo-European traditions, 3 is the number of fate, of cycles, of inevitability. To encounter 3 riders in order is to be reminded that nothing escapes the full arc of existence. You cannot stop at dawn or linger at noon forever. Night always comes, and then, inevitably, dawn again. The riders embody this truth, and Baba Yaga's mastery over them marks her as a figure not bound by the cycle, but commanding it. She stands above the wheel even as she embodies it. The riders also reveal something about the structure of Baba Yaga's trials. They take place over days and nights, marked by the rising and setting of the sun. Each impossible task Vasilisa completes is measured against this cycle. Time is not an indifferent backdrop, it is part of the ordeal. The riders enforce it, and Baba Yaga tests her victim within its boundaries. The challenge is not only the work itself, but the endurance of time, the patience to wait for morning, the wisdom to rest when instructed, the humility to recognize that one cannot control the sun or the night. This, too, is part of the initiation. The imagery of the riders connects Baba Yaga to wider mythological traditions. Dawn, noon, and night are universal experiences, and many cultures personified them. In Indian myth, the Ashvins ride the sky as divine horsemen of dawn. In Greek tradition, Helios drives the sun across the heavens in his chariot. In Norse myth, the wolves, Skull and Hati, chase the sun and moon until the world's end. The Slavic riders belong to this same family of symbols, but their allegiance to Baba Yaga sets them apart. She is not the sun itself, but its mistress, not the dawn, but the one who commands dawn's arrival. This suggests that her origins may lie in pre-Christian goddess figures associated with time, cycles, and fate, later transformed into the figure of a witch in exile. For those who told and retold these stories, the riders also carried a moral lesson. They reminded listeners that every stage of life has its place. Youth is dawn, full of beginnings and promise. Adulthood is noon, full of labor and strength. Old age and death are midnight, the inevitable conclusion. To see these as riders serving Baba Yaga was to see life itself as a journey that ends at her fence of bones. She waits at the threshold, but the journey to her is guided by time itself. The listeners, whether children or adults, could not help but see themselves in the rhythm of those horses' hooves. The way Vasilisa reacts to the riders also teaches something important. She does not challenge them or fear them. She acknowledges them, asks about them, and accepts Baba Yaga's answer. In this way, the story models the proper relationship to time, respect, not resistance. To fear night is natural, but to accept it as part of the cycle is wisdom. To long for noon's strength forever is folly. The tale instructs that to live well is to move with the riders, not against them, to honor each stage as it comes. When folklorists wrote down this tale, they preserved the riders as vivid symbols, but their meaning was already ancient. They are remnants of a worldview that saw the world not as linear, but as cyclical, where every ending was a beginning, where time itself was sacred. Baba Yaga, by commanding them, became not just a figure of fear, but a reflection of this cosmic order. She was not the disruption of time, but its embodiment. To face her was to face time, and to survive her was to be granted a place within its cycle. Modern retellings sometimes omit the riders, focusing instead on the hut and the witch herself. Yet those who keep them find that they add a dimension of grandeur to the tale. Without them, Baba Yaga is a powerful witch in a strange house. With them, she is something far greater, a cosmic force attended by day, sun, and night themselves. The riders lift her from the woods into the sky, into the structure of existence itself. And they remind us that the forest is not only a place of danger, but a place where time reveals itself, where the passage of hours becomes visible in the form of horsemen. This is why the riders endure in the imagination of those who encounter the tale. They are not simply strange companions. They are the rhythm of life itself, riding ahead of every one of us, marking our days, leading us toward the hut in the forest where the final test awaits. And in the glow of the skulls, in the sweep of the broom, in the grinding of the mortar, Baba Yaga waits, mistress not only of bones and fire, but of the very hours that carry us to her door. The heart of every Baba Yaga tale is not the sight of her hut spinning on its chicken legs, nor even the bone fence with its glowing skulls, but the ordeal that begins once the visitor crosses that dreadful threshold. It is in the test she sets, the impossible tasks that can never be accomplished by ordinary means, that her true nature is revealed. She is not a random killer, nor is she a generous helper. She is the one who measures, who weighs, who sets conditions no mortal could meet unaided. To approach her is to submit to trial, to accept that survival will depend not on strength, but on cleverness, respect, and often on some hidden ally. The terrible tests are her way of separating the worthy from the unworthy, the respectful from the arrogant, the prepared from the careless. In the most famous of these tales, Vasilisa finds herself before Baba Yaga's great stove, told to complete chores that stretch beyond the limits of human endurance. Sweep the yard, cook the meal, fetch water, all in a place where invisible hands flit about and disembodied servants carry out the witch's commands. But these are only the beginning. The true test is always an impossible one. In Vasilisa's case, it is the task of sorting. Baba Yaga pours out a mountain of grain mixed with dust, poppy seeds and pebbles, and orders the girl to separate them one by one before dawn. No person could hope to do this. The task is designed to break her, to prove that she is nothing, to drive her to despair. But the doll her mother gave her comes alive, whispering that Vasilisa should sleep while it calls upon helpers. By morning, the impossible has been done. The grains are neatly separated, the task complete, and Baba Yaga is forced to acknowledge the result. This cycle repeats in many tales. Baba Yaga sets tasks that echo the rhythms of household labor, but magnified into grotesque proportions. In some versions, the hero or heroine must wash filthy clothing until it gleams brighter than snow, or sweep the yard until not a speck of dust remains, or cook a meal from ingredients deliberately chosen to be spoiled and unusable. Each task pushes domestic work into the realm of the absurd, turning the everyday chores of women into trials of cosmic difficulty. The message is unmistakable. Baba Yaga is the magnification of domestic authority, the mother turned monstrous, the housekeeper turned judge, the force of home elevated into a supernatural crucible. Yet these tasks are not without meaning. They are tests of discipline, patience, humility. They demand obedience to instruction even when the demand seems impossible. They require reliance on allies, on hidden wisdom, on gifts inherited from the past. The child who hears these stories learns that impossible challenges are not defeated by rage or brute effort, but by persistence, respect, and cleverness. They also learn that survival depends on recognizing the limits of one's own power and the importance of unseen helpers, whether ancestors, spirits, or intuition itself. Sometimes the tasks take on darker tones. In a few tales, Baba Yaga orders the visitor to cook and serve food that turns out to be the flesh of someone they knew. In others, she demands that they bathe her, comb her hair, or perform intimate services that force them into proximity with her monstrous body. These tasks push the boundary between horror and initiation, confronting the visitor with the grotesque, the abject, the terrifyingly human aspects of the witch. To succeed, they must repress their revulsion, maintain composure, and carry out the work without complaint. The lesson is harsh but clear. Survival requires facing what is unbearable without flinching. Through it all, Baba Yaga watches closely. She notes not only whether the tasks are done, but how they are done. Did the visitor speak respectfully? Did they call her grandmother? Did they restrain their curiosity, asking only the questions permitted? Did they show gratitude, humility, and caution? If they did, she grants them what they came for. If not, they join the ranks of skulls on her fence. This structured cruelty is what makes her role so compelling. She is not chaos, she is law, terrible and merciless, but law nonetheless. Her judgments are final, but they are consistent. The reward for enduring these trials is not gold or jewels, it is fire. This is perhaps the most powerful symbol in all the Baba Yaga tales. Fire is life. In a world where winters were long and bitter, fire meant survival. It meant warmth, food, light, the ability to live another day. To send someone to Baba Yaga for fire was to send them to the source of life itself, but also to the source of death. For her, fire is no ordinary flame. It burns within skulls. It devours the wicked. It destroys as easily as it illuminates. To receive fire from Baba Yaga is to receive a double-edged gift, one that can protect or annihilate depending on how it is used. In the story of Vasilisa, the fire comes in the form of a skull plucked from the fence. Its hollow eyes blaze with unquenchable light. She carries it home, terrified, tempted to discard it, but guided by her doll she obeys. When she arrives, her stepmother and stepsisters rush to take it, but the skull's gaze fixes upon them. Its fire does not warm them. It burns them alive, reducing them to ashes by dawn. Vasilisa alone is spared, for she carried it with respect and obedience. The fire thus becomes both justice and liberation. It punishes the cruel and frees the innocent. It embodies the paradox of Baba Yaga herself, destroyer and benefactor, death and life, terror and necessity. The symbolism of the fire resonates across cultures. Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to humanity, an act that defined human civilization but also carried punishment. In Hindu tradition, fire is Agni, both destructive and purifying, the mediator between humans and gods. In Slavic tradition too, fire was sacred, treated with reverence, never to be extinguished casually. To imagine it carried in a skull was to imagine life wrested from death, survival drawn out of mortality. Baba Yaga's gift was thus not a token, but the very essence of transformation. Those who survived her tests returned not just alive, but altered, carrying within them the power of death, turned to life. The terrible tests also echo rites of passage. In many societies, initiates were required to endure ordeals that seemed impossible, to undergo symbolic death before re-emerging as adults. Baba Yaga's trials served the same purpose. The visitor enters her hut as a child, dependent, frightened, untested. They leave with fire, with knowledge, with the mark of having faced death and survived. They are no longer children, but transformed beings. The tasks, absurd as they seem, are the machinery of this initiation. They strip away innocence, force confrontation with fear, and grant wisdom in return. The gift of fire thus represents more than survival. It is empowerment. It is the ability to bring light into darkness, to carry warmth into the cold, to enact justice upon those who oppress. In Vasilisa's case, it destroys her stepmother and stepsisters, not by her own hand, but by the impartial judgment of the other world. In other tales, the fire enables heroes to complete their quests, to burn through obstacles, to carry life back to their villages. Always, it is the same. Baba Yaga gives not comfort but power, and power is always dangerous. The listeners of these tales would have understood this intimately. Fire in a peasant household was not a trivial matter. It had to be tended carefully, kept alive through the night, preserved through the seasons. To lose fire in the dead of winter was to risk death for the entire family. To imagine that it could only be regained by venturing into the forest, facing the witch, enduring her tests, was to understand at a deep level how fragile life could be, and how costly survival sometimes was. Baba Yaga personified this truth. She was the guardian of fire because she was the guardian of survival itself. She gave life only to those who had proven they deserved it. For the child who listened, the lesson was unforgettable. You cannot gain what you need without risk. You cannot carry fire without danger. To live is to endure trials, to face tasks that seem impossible, to trust in the wisdom of those who came before, whether embodied in a doll or in memory. And when you emerge, you do not return unchanged. You carry fire, and with it, the knowledge of death and survival intertwined. This is why the tales of Baba Yaga's tests and gifts have endured for centuries. They speak to the universal human experience of trial, of suffering, of transformation. They remind us that wisdom is purchased through ordeal, that survival is not granted freely, and that every gift of life carries within it the shadow of death. Baba Yaga's terrible tests are not cruelty for its own sake. They are the machinery of change, the crucible in which children become adults, in which the powerless become strong, in which the seeker gains the fire that makes life possible. To understand Baba Yaga, it is not enough to picture her as a lone witch in the forest, detached from the wider beliefs of the people who told her stories. She comes from a world where the landscape itself was alive, where every river and grove, every hearth fire and storm cloud carried spirit and intention. For the early Slavic peoples, religion was not confined to temples or sacred texts. It was the fabric of daily life, woven into every field ploughed, every tree felled, every offering left at the edge of the forest. Baba Yaga's domain, terrifying as it seems, is an extension of this worldview, a survival of the animistic and polytheistic traditions that defined the ancient Slavic world. The Slavs worshipped a pantheon of gods who embodied the forces that shaped their existence. At the head stood Perun, the thunder god, wielder of lightning, lord of war, and the sky. His power was absolute in battle, but also in the weather that could destroy or bless the harvest. Opposed to him was Veles, god of cattle, commerce, and the underworld, a figure of trickery and transformation, often imagined as a serpent or dragon. The tension between Perun and Veles defined the rhythm of storms, seasons, and cosmic balance. Alongside them were other deities: Dazbog, the giver of sunlight and prosperity; Mokosh, goddess of moisture, fertility, and women's work; Svarog, the smith god of fire and creation; and many more, each embodying a piece of the natural and human world. But beyond the named gods were countless spirits: the Domovoi who guarded the household, the Leshi who ruled the forest, the Rusalka who haunted rivers and lakes. To live as a Slavic villager was to share the world with these beings constantly. Every sound in the night, every movement in the woods could be the sign of a spirit. Offerings were left on thresholds, in fields, at the base of trees. Bread, milk, or drops of alcohol were given to appease these presences, to ensure their favor or at least avert their malice. Life was precarious, and respect for the unseen was a form of insurance, a way of acknowledging that humans did not live alone, but in a world teeming with other, older forces. The forest was at the heart of this belief system. To modern eyes, it may appear as wilderness, an expanse of trees stretching without end. But for the Slavs, it was a sacred place, both feared and revered. It was the source of wood for houses and tools, of wild game, of honey, herbs, and mushrooms. But it was also the home of the Leshi, the unpredictable master of the forest, who could lead travelers astray with illusions, mimic voices to lure them deeper, or demand respect in exchange for safe passage. The forest was never neutral. It was always alive, always watching. Sacred groves dotted the land, places where no tree could be cut, no soil disturbed, because the gods themselves were believed to dwell there. Priests performed rituals beneath oaks and lindens, Sacrifices were made to ensure fertility and protection, and communities gathered in these groves to celebrate festivals marking the seasons. Fire, too, was sacred. It was tended carefully, never allowed to go out, because it was the gift of Svarog, the creative force that sustained life. Ritual fires marked the turning of the seasons, especially at Kupala night, when bonfires were leapt over in acts of purification and fertility, when men and women sought omens of love and harvest in the flames. The hearth fire in every home was the center of domestic life, the place where offerings were made to the domovoi, the ancestral spirit who guarded the family. To lose fire was a disaster. To relight it was a sacred act. It is in this context that Baba Yaga's role as keeper and giver of fire takes on its deepest meaning. She is not only a witch with a skull lantern, she is a distorted echo of the divine gift of fire itself, the one who can extinguish and rekindle, the one who holds life and death in her flames. The underworld also loomed large in Slavic cosmology. Unlike the Christian heaven and hell that would later reshape their beliefs, the Slavic afterlife was not sharply divided between reward and punishment. It was a shadowy continuation of existence, often imagined as lying beneath the roots of the great world tree. The souls of the dead lingered close to the living, requiring ritual care, offerings, and remembrance. Neglected dead could become dangerous, returning as spirits to trouble the living. Graves were visited, feasts held in honor of ancestors, food left to nourish the departed. This closeness of the living and the dead is reflected in Baba Yaga's imagery. Her fence of bones, her glowing skulls, her role as a figure who deals death but also gives gifts from it, all make sense in a culture where the dead were never distant, where bones were not merely remains, but carriers of presence and power. Sacred groves and holy trees connected all of these layers of belief. The Slavs believed in a cosmic tree, often identified with the oak, whose roots reached into the underworld, whose trunk supported the earth, and whose branches touched the heavens. Birds perched in its crown, serpents coiled around its roots, and gods dwelled along its limbs. This tree linked the realms of life, death, and divinity. Smaller sacred groves reflected this larger image, each community maintaining its own holy spaces where rituals tied them to the cosmic order. Baba Yaga's hut, perched on its strange legs and encircled by bones, can be seen as a dark parody of these sacred spaces. It is a grove inverted, a shrine turned terrifying. Where the community gathered in reverence, the individual now faces fear alone. Where the tree represented stability, her hut spins endlessly. Yet the structure is the same, a boundary between worlds, a place where mortal meets divine. When Christianity spread through Slavic lands, it sought to erase these beliefs, cutting down groves, building churches on sacred sites, demonizing the old gods and spirits. But the memory of them did not vanish. It survived in folk tales, in customs, in the half-hidden rituals that persisted under new names. Baba Yaga herself may well be the remnant of a goddess, her powers reshaped and feared in the new order. Her command of fire, time, death, and initiation echoes too closely the roles of older deities to be dismissed as coincidence. She is the exile of the sacred grove, the goddess turned witch, still embodying the mysteries of nature, but now cloaked in bones and terror. The ancient Slavic world was not neatly divided into good and evil. Its gods quarreled, its spirits could bless or curse, its forest could feed or devour. Baba Yaga reflects this complexity. She is not purely malevolent. She is the dangerous necessity, the embodiment of a worldview where survival required negotiation with forces larger than oneself. To walk into her clearing was no different from leaving offerings at a grove or making sacrifices before harvest. It was the same acknowledgement. Humans live in a world not fully their own, and to live well requires respect for what lies beyond. For those who listened to her tales, Baba Yaga was not only frightening but familiar. She was the shadow of Mokosh, the fierce echo of the hearthfire, the inverse of the protective domovoi. She was the embodiment of a world where every tree might conceal a spirit, every stream a rusalka, every storm a battle between Perun and Veles. She carried within her all of these echoes, transformed into a single unforgettable figure. Her hut, her fence, her mortar, her fire, each was a fragment of the old sacred world, reshaped by memory and fear. To picture her in this way is to see her not as an isolated monster, but as a window into the beliefs of the Slavs before the cross came to their lands. She is the last priestess of the grove, the goddess of cycles turned into a witch of bones. Her trials preserve the logic of initiation rituals, her fire, the sanctity of the hearth, her forest, the mystery of the sacred grove. And so when the stories are told, they do more than frighten children. They preserve the memory of a world in which the divine was everywhere, in which every grove was sacred, and in which to live was to walk daily among gods and spirits. When folklorists and mythologists began to collect the stories of Baba Yaga, they saw at once that she was unlike most of the witches who populate European fairy tales. She was too large, too strange, too powerful to be dismissed as a mere old woman with a taste for cruelty. She was not simply a human who had turned to sorcery, nor even a demonic figure to frighten children into obedience. Her house that walks on legs, her fence of bones, her command over time and fire, all of these pointed to something older, something that existed before the language of witches and spells. In her, many scholars recognized the faded outline of a goddess, one who had once commanded reverence but had been pushed into exile, remembered only in distorted form as a devourer of children in the woods. This pattern is not unique to Slavic lands. Across Europe, the arrival of Christianity reshaped the older pantheons, transforming deities into demons, goddesses into hags, sacred places into haunted ruins. The great mothers of fertility became the terrifying crones of folklore. The wise women of the groves became witches, muttering curses at the edge of villages. In Baba Yaga, we see this transformation at its most complete. Her power is unmistakable, but it is cloaked in fear, twisted into the form of a monster rather than a deity. She has not been destroyed, she endures, but she endures in exile, stripped of her shrine, her priestesses, her worshippers, left only with the echo of her former grandeur. When we look closely at her attributes, the parallels to goddesses of life, death, and rebirth become difficult to ignore. She rules over a liminal house that spins like the cycles of time, guarded by bones that declare her dominion over death. She flies through the sky in a vessel that recalls both the shaman's tools of transformation and the goddess's chariot. She commands the riders of dawn, noon, and night, showing mastery over the passage of the sun. She grants fire, the very essence of survival, but only after trials that echo the rites of initiation. These are not the traits of a marginal witch. They are the traits of a sovereign goddess of cycles, of transformation, of mortality and renewal. Some scholars have suggested that Baba Yaga may preserve memories of a mother goddess worshipped in the forests and groves of the Slavs, perhaps related to Mokosh, the goddess of moisture, fertility, and women's work. Mokosh was a central figure in Slavic religion, honored in rituals tied to weaving, childbirth, and the fertility of the land. She, too, had associations with life and death, with the weaving of fate, with the passage of time. It is possible that Baba Yaga is what remained of Mokosh when her worship was suppressed, the darker side of her nature surviving in folktale form. Others see in Baba Yaga echoes of an even older archetype, the ancient Indo-European mother goddess who appears in countless forms, the Greek Demeter and Hecate, the Norse Hel, the Celtic Morrigan. In all of these, the same themes repeat: fertility and death, wisdom and terror, the power to nourish and the power to destroy. The transformation of goddess into witch reflects the changing position of women in society as well. In the older pagan world, women could act as priestesses, healers, keepers of sacred knowledge. Their authority was tied to the cycles of life and the fertility of the earth. With the coming of Christianity, much of this authority was stripped away, replaced with suspicion, fear, and accusations of witchcraft. Baba Yaga embodies this shift. She is the memory of a female divine power, recast as dangerous and devouring. Her hut in the forest is what remains of the sacred grove, her broom and mortar, the echoes of ritual tools, her fire, the remnant of sacred flame. She is what happens when the goddess is driven underground but refuses to disappear. Her exile is also evident in her role as tester and judge. In pagan ritual, initiates often underwent ordeals overseen by priestesses or shamans. They faced tasks, symbolic death, and rebirth into new roles as adults or warriors. Baba Yaga preserves this structure but removes it from its sacred context. She is no longer a priestess guiding ritual. She is a witch who demands impossible labor. Yet the result is the same. Those who endure emerge transformed. Her tests are fragments of an older religious practice reinterpreted through the lens of fear. The stories themselves sometimes acknowledge her divine scope even as they cloak her in monstrosity. When Vasilisa asks about the riders she encounters, Baba Yaga answers with blunt honesty, they are her bright day, her red sun, her dark midnight. The phrasing is telling. They are not merely servants, they are hers, part of her domain, part of her identity. No ordinary witch could make such a claim, only a goddess could. But the tale does not call her a goddess. It leaves her in the ambiguous place between memory and myth, terrifying but essential, feared but necessary. The exile of Baba Yaga is also visible in how she straddles the line between household and wilderness. In Slavic life, the home was sacred, centered around the hearth fire guarded by ancestral spirits. The forest was equally sacred but feared, a place of spirits and danger. Baba Yaga exists in both worlds at once. She is domestic in her tools, mortar, pestle, broom, but wild in her hut and fence. She is the hearth mother and the forest goddess fused into one. In this fusion we may glimpse the older unity of sacred feminine power, broken apart by new beliefs and reassembled in folktale as a witch of contradictions. Her image has endured precisely because of this exile. She is too large to vanish, too deeply rooted in cultural memory to be forgotten. Instead, she survives in distorted form, carrying with her the fragments of an older religion that could no longer be spoken aloud. Every time her story was told, the listeners felt something beyond ordinary fear. They felt awe, the shiver of recognition that this was not just a monster, but a remnant of something divine. The Christian world might call her a witch, but the memory of her power spoke otherwise. The idea of Baba Yaga as an exiled goddess also explains her paradoxical nature. She helps and harms, devours and guides, terrifies and teaches. Goddesses of life and death were always double in nature. Demeter could bring fertility or famine. Hecate could guide or curse. The Morrigan could grant victory or destruction. Baba Yaga fits perfectly into this pattern. She is not inconsistent. She is double, as all goddesses of cycles are double. Her exile has stripped away her worshippers, but not her duality. In her ambiguity lies her truth. She is both what nourishes and what destroys, both what terrifies and what empowers. Even the way she is sought out by heroes and heroines suggests divinity in disguise. You do not seek advice from monsters, you flee them or kill them. But in tale after tale, characters go to Baba Yaga not only for fire, but for wisdom, for magical objects, for direction. They risk her wrath because they know she has what they need. This is the behavior of petitioners before a deity, not of victims before a predator. The stories remember her as dangerous, but they also remember her as necessary. That necessity is the surest sign of her divine past. Modern scholars and storytellers who explore her myth often see in her the shadow of a goddess whose name is lost, whose rituals are forgotten, but whose power lingers in bone and fire. They recognize that exile does not erase but transforms, that suppression turns gods into monsters but never destroys their essence. Baba Yaga is the clearest proof of this. She is a goddess in exile, living at the edge of the forest, stripped of temples but still commanding awe. For those who told her tales, this exile was never articulated directly. No peasant sitting by the fire declared her a goddess, but they knew she was not ordinary. They knew she was larger than life, that her hut spun like the world itself, that her riders moved like the sun across the sky. They may have feared her, but they also understood that to survive her was to be changed forever. In their fear, they preserved her memory, passing down the remnants of a divinity too strong to be erased, too powerful to vanish even in exile. When we place Baba Yaga back into the context of the wider European imagination, it becomes clear that she is not alone. Across the continent, echoes of her appear under different names, each shaped by the local landscape, the seasonal rhythms, and the layers of myth that communities carried with them. These figures are not identical, but they share a core identity: women of immense age and power, embodiments of death and rebirth, guardians of thresholds, feared as witches, yet carrying traces of their past as goddesses. To see Baba Yaga clearly, we must see her sisters, the ones who haunt the forests, mountains, and winters of Europe. Among the Slavs themselves, one of the clearest parallels is Morana, the goddess of death and winter. Her presence is remembered not so much in folk tales as in ritual. Each spring, villagers fashioned an effigy of her, often as a female figure made of straw, dressed in old clothes. They carried her through the village in procession, chanting and mocking, before casting her into a river or burning her in a fire. This ritual, known as the expulsion of Morana, symbolized the end of winter and the coming of spring. Morana was feared, but she was also necessary, for without her there could be no cycle of renewal. She brought the cold, the hunger, the long nights, but her departure opened the way for warmth, harvest, and life. Morana shares with Baba Yaga the same duality, the bringer of death who ensures the return of life. Both are old, terrifying, and relentless, but both are also essential. The image of the burning or drowning effigy echoes the same truth found in Baba Yaga's fire. Death feeds life. Destruction clears the way for rebirth. In some traditions, Morana is imagined as a pale, skeletal woman, clad in white, her presence felt in the frost and the silence of snow. In others, she is a beautiful maiden whose embrace brings death, her beauty as dangerous as it is alluring. This dual image, the crone and the maiden, mirrors Baba Yaga's own paradoxes, suggesting that the figures may once have been facets of the same broader archetype, split by time and region into separate myths. Moving west into the highlands of Scotland and Ireland, we encounter another sister, the Cailleach, the Veiled One. She is the Hag of Winter, a giantess who strides across the land, shaping its mountains and rivers with her hammer. In folklore, she is said to leap from hill to hill, dropping boulders that form valleys and lakes. She carries a staff that brings frost, and when she strikes the ground with it, the earth hardens into ice. Like Baba Yaga, she is ancient beyond reckoning, present at the very shaping of the world. She is feared for her cruelty, for her power to prolong winter, for her relentless hunger. Yet she is also honored, for she brings the snow that nourishes the soil, the cold that clears pests, the storms that balance the cycle of the seasons. The Cailleach is sometimes described as a single figure, and sometimes as many, a host of veiled hags who rule different regions. In this multiplicity, she resembles Baba Yaga, who is sometimes said to be one old woman and sometimes three sisters, indistinguishable from one another. Both figures resist confinement to a single identity. They are collective as much as individual, archetypes as much as persons. The Kaileach, like Baba Yaga, is also deeply tied to thresholds of time. She rules the dark half of the year, from Samhain to Beltane, and yields her power to Brigid, the goddess of spring, when the warmth returns. Her reign is temporary but necessary, her departure as important as her presence. This echoes Baba Yaga's riders of dawn, noon, and midnight, her cycle of time that cannot be broken. The Kaileach is the winter half, the dark rider, the midnight presence that ensures the wheel keeps turning. In the Germanic world, particularly in tales recorded by the brothers Grimm, another sister appears under the name Frau Holle. At first glance, she seems gentler than Baba Yaga or the Kaileach, but beneath the surface her role is the same. In the story most often told, a young girl falls into a well and finds herself in another world. There she enters the service of Frau Holle, an old woman who tasks her with keeping house, baking bread, and shaking out the feather beds. When the girl obeys with diligence and respect, Frau Holle rewards her with showers of gold. Later, her lazy stepsister attempts the same journey but refuses to work. Frau Holle punishes her by sending her back covered in pitch. This story is clearly an initiation tale like those of Baba Yaga. The young woman descends into another realm, serves an old woman of great power, completes impossible chores, and emerges transformed, rewarded, or punished depending on her conduct. Frau Holle is less terrifying in appearance, but the logic is the same. She is the tester, the giver of gifts, the one who measures worthiness. Like Baba Yaga, she is tied to the cycles of nature. When she shakes her feather bed, snow falls in the human world. She governs weather, winter, and renewal. She exists between worlds, her domain accessed through the well, a classic symbol of passage to the other world. Her hut may not stand on chicken legs, but her realm is just as liminal, just as necessary. Comparing these figures across Europe reveals a pattern too consistent to ignore. Each is an old woman of immense power, feared for her cruelty but necessary for her gifts. Each tests those who enter her service with tasks that echo the labors of domestic life. Each is tied to cycles of time and nature, Morana to winter and spring, the Kaileach to the dark half of the year, Frau Holle to snow and seasonal renewal, Baba Yaga to dawn, noon, and midnight, to fire and death. Each embodies the paradox of destruction and creation, terror and wisdom, exile and persistence. These sisters also reflect the shared Indo-European roots of mythology. Long before the stories were separated by language and culture, there may have been a common goddess of cycles, of winter, of death and renewal. In the north, she became the Kaileach, in the west, Frau Holle, in the east, Morana, and in the forests of the Slavs, Baba Yaga. The details changed, but the core remained. The crone of power, the goddess turned witch, the exile who still commands respect. What makes Baba Yaga stand out among these sisters is her extremity. Morana is expelled in ritual, her effigy destroyed to mark the end of winter. The Kaileach is seasonal, yielding her reign to spring. Frau Holle is softened into a moral tale of diligence and laziness. Baba Yaga, by contrast, remains raw and terrifying. Her hut is monstrous, her fence grotesque, her appetite cannibalistic. She has not been fully tamed into allegory or seasonal cycle. She retains the ancient terror of the goddess in exile, stripped of worship but not of power. She is what remains when the sacred is remembered only in fragments, in fear, in half-hidden ritual echoes. And yet, like her sisters, she is not simply destructive. She gives fire, just as Frau Holle gives gold, just as the Kaileach ensures soil fertility through her snows, just as Morana clears the way for spring. All of them embody the truth that death and labor, darkness and fear are part of the cycle that sustains life. To face them is to face the inevitability of change, the necessity of respect, the endurance required to pass through ordeal and emerge stronger. Listeners across Europe would have felt the resonance of these figures in their own landscapes. The icy winds of winter, the dark forests, the sudden storms, all could be personified in the form of the old woman, veiled, hunched, fierce. The stories gave shape to fear, but also to understanding. They explained why winter came, why snow fell, why hardships had to be endured. They turned natural cycles into narratives of survival, with the witch goddess at their center. In this way, Baba Yaga belongs to a family of exiled goddesses who refused to vanish, who lived on in folklore even when their temples were gone. She's not an isolated anomaly, but part of a larger pattern, a chorus of ancient voices across Europe speaking the same truth in different tongues, that death and rebirth, destruction and creation, cruelty and gift are inseparable. To understand her fully is to place her among these sisters, to see her not as a singular monster, but as one face of a vast, enduring archetype that haunted and guided the people of Europe for centuries. In many of the old tales, Baba Yaga is not alone. When the hero or heroine sets out into the forest, they sometimes encounter one Baba Yaga and then another, and then yet another, all nearly identical in appearance and behavior. They live in separate huts, they set similar tasks, and they are referred to in the same way: the Baba Yaga, grandmother, old witch. In some stories, there are 3 sisters, in others 2, in still others an indeterminate number that stretches into the mist of memory. For listeners, this detail created both confusion and fascination. Was there only one Baba Yaga, or was she many? Was she a single witch who moved from place to place, or a whole family of them, bound together in some incomprehensible sisterhood? The answer, of course, is both. Folklore rarely draws neat lines between individuals and archetypes. What matters is not the number, but the idea. Baba Yaga exists in plurality. She is one, and she is many. She is singular, and she is collective. This multiplicity is itself a clue to her deeper identity. The figure of the triple goddess, maiden, mother, and crone, is one of the oldest in Indo-European myth, appearing again and again under different names. In the Greek world, the Moirai, or Fates, spun, measured, and cut the thread of life. Hecate stood at the crossroads with 3 faces, each looking in a different direction. In Norse tradition, the Norns dwelled by the roots of Yggdrasil, weaving destiny together. In Celtic lands, the Morrigan often appeared as 3 sisters, sometimes indistinguishable, sometimes complementary aspects of war, prophecy, and death. Baba Yaga fits naturally into this pattern. Her triple appearance in folk tales is not an accident or a quirk of oral tradition. It is a survival of this ancient archetype, the goddess divided into 3 aspects, each reinforcing the others. But where the maiden, mother, and crone pattern often emphasizes different ages of womanhood, Baba Yaga's triad compresses them all into the crone, as though the other aspects have been erased or forgotten. What remains is the terrifying, devouring side of the goddess, multiplied to form a sisterhood of hags. This distortion speaks to her exile. Once a complete goddess embodying the full cycle, she has been reduced to her most fearsome face. Yet even in this reduced form, her multiplicity persists. She cannot be contained by a single figure. She multiplies, doubles, echoes herself across the forest. The idea of the triple Baba Yaga also reflects the structure of initiation and trial. The hero does not pass one test, but 3. They do not face one threshold, but several. Each hut, each sister, each task is a stage in the journey, leading deeper into transformation. In this way, the multiplicity of Baba Yaga mirrors the stages of life itself: childhood, adulthood, old age, birth, death, rebirth, dawn, noon, midnight. The same cycle represented by her riders is repeated in her sisters. The visitor must endure not one ordeal, but the full cycle of ordeals, each guarded by a face of the witch. To survive all is to emerge not merely alive, but initiated, transformed by the fullness of her power. The existence of multiple Baba Yagas also raises the question of her identity. If there are three, which is the true one? The tales never answer. They are all real, and none of them are final. This ambiguity is deliberate. It suggests that Baba Yaga is not a person but a role, not an individual but an archetype that can be filled by many. The forest does not have one witch but a repeating presence, a pattern of danger and trial that manifests wherever it is needed. This makes her less a character and more a force, a principle embodied in multiple forms. You do not defeat Baba Yaga by escaping one hut because another waits. You do not understand her by meeting one sister because others remain. She is endless, multiplied, unconfined. This idea unsettles modern readers who seek consistency, but for those who first told the stories, it was natural. Life itself presents dangers not once but repeatedly. Hunger returns each winter, illness strikes again and again, storms come every season. Survival is not a single test, but a series of them, each echoing the last. The triple Baba Yaga embodies this truth. To live is to face her not once, but always. To pass through her trials again and again, each time learning, each time surviving, until finally one does not return. The multiplicity of her sisters is the multiplicity of life's ordeals. The notion of the triple witch also explains why Baba Yaga can never be pinned down as wholly evil or wholly good. Different sisters may play different roles. One sets tasks with cruelty, another offers a gift with unexpected generosity, another devours without hesitation. Together they embody the full spectrum of her paradoxical nature. Just as the Moirai wove both joy and sorrow into destiny, just as the Morrigan granted both victory and ruin, so too the Baba Yaga sisters encompass all possibilities. To meet them is to confront the unpredictable, the certainty that fate itself contains both blessing and curse. The triad also reinforces her connection to death and rebirth. In many myths, triple goddesses are guardians of the underworld, presiding over the souls of the dead, determining their fates, guiding their passage. Baba Yaga's bone fence and glowing skulls, her tests that amount to symbolic death, her gift of fire that represents rebirth, all of these align perfectly with this role. The fact that there are multiple Baba Yagas only strengthens the connection. She is not one death but many, not one trial, but the unending series of trials that mark existence. Each sister is a gatekeeper, each hut a threshold, each ordeal a passage through death to transformation. Even her ambiguous family ties in folklore reflect this multiplicity. Some tales say she has daughters or nieces who resemble her, others that she has sisters, still others that she is unique. This fluidity is itself the mark of an archetype rather than an individual. She is not bound by genealogy or chronology. She multiplies as needed, splitting into sisters or daughters or doubles depending on the story. What matters is not who she is in relation to others, but what role she fulfills. The crone at the threshold, multiplied into three, ensuring that no one passes without trial. This triadic nature also connects her to the natural world. Many plants sacred to Slavic ritual, such as birch and oak, were associated with threefold symbolism: roots, trunk, branches, earth, sky, underworld. The cycles of agriculture, sowing, growth, harvest, were understood in triple terms. Even the human life cycle was marked by three great thresholds: birth, marriage, and death. Baba Yaga, appearing in multiples, embodies these patterns. She is the witch of cycles, her sisterhood reflecting the structure of nature itself. Listeners who heard of multiple Baba Yagas would not have been confused so much as awed. To know that she was not one but many was to understand that her presence was inescapable. She was everywhere in the forest, in every story, in every trial. She was not to be outwitted once and forgotten. She was to be endured again and again, a constant force in life. This endlessness is part of her terror, but also part of her truth. Life itself is endless trial until its final end, and Baba Yaga is the face of that endlessness. In modern times, storytellers have often preferred to simplify her into one witch in one hut. But the older tales preserve the deeper, stranger truth. She is a triad, a multiplicity, a triple goddess in exile. Her sisters are not separate characters but reflections of herself, facets of a larger whole, reminders that she cannot be reduced or contained. She is one, and she is three, and she is many. To tell her story is to step into this multiplicity, to recognize that the witch of the Slavic Woods is not a single voice, but a chorus, echoing across huts and forests, across sisters and trials, across the endless cycle of life and death. To walk into Baba Yaga's domain is always to cross a boundary, and in folklore boundaries are never simple. They are not just lines on the ground, but places of danger and power, where one world ends and another begins. The hut on chicken legs does not merely sit in the forest, it stands at the edge of life itself, spinning until it is commanded to turn, waiting as a portal between realms. The fence of bones with its fiery skulls is not just decoration, it is a warning that those who pass inside step out of the human order and into something other. Every part of her dwelling declares the same truth. This is the threshold, and Baba Yaga is its guardian. She is not merely a dweller in the woods. She is the one who watches the passage from life to death, from childhood to adulthood, from ignorance to wisdom. To face her is to face the most dangerous crossing of all. This role as guardian of the threshold explains why her stories are always filled with trials of initiation. The visitor enters her domain as they are, uncertain, untested, often helpless. To survive, they must pass through ordeals that strip away their old selves and prepare them for transformation. The tasks she sets are absurdly difficult, not because she delights in cruelty, but because real transformation is never easy. Sorting grains from dust, cooking impossible meals, keeping order in a house that defies all order, these are symbolic acts of discipline, patience, humility. They break the arrogance of the visitor, forcing them to rely on respect, on allies, on hidden wisdom. By passing these tasks, the traveler shows that they are ready to cross the threshold and emerge into a new stage of being. In this way, Baba Yaga functions much like the initiators of traditional societies. In cultures across the world, passage into adulthood was marked by trials, fasting, isolation, exposure to the wilderness, tasks that demanded endurance, courage, and humility. The child entered the initiation vulnerable and emerged transformed, now an adult, now part of the community with new rights and responsibilities. Baba Yaga's tales preserve this logic. The hero or heroine goes into the forest, a place of fear and uncertainty. They face the guardian, endure her tests, and return with fire, with wisdom, with magical aid. They return changed, no longer children, but initiated into a deeper knowledge of the world. The death that hangs over her domain is central to this process. Initiation always involves symbolic death. The initiate must lose their old self, must be stripped of their former identity, must be confronted with mortality. Baba Yaga's hut, with its oven large enough to roast humans, embodies this death. To enter it is to risk annihilation. The fence of bones shows what happens to those who fail. The glowing skulls illuminate the fact that many have perished before. This is not play acting. The danger is real, the possibility of death tangible. And yet, for those who succeed, death becomes the path to rebirth. The skull that burns with fire becomes the gift that ensures life. The oven that threatens to consume becomes the vessel of transformation. Death is not the end, but the passage. The role of the guardian of the threshold is always ambivalent. She is not there to welcome or comfort. She is there to test, to block, to demand proof of readiness. In myth, these guardians take many forms: serpents, sphinxes, monstrous hounds. In Slavic lore, it is Baba Yaga, the crone who devours the unworthy but spares the wise. She is both judge and gatekeeper, deciding who may pass and who must perish. This ambivalence is not cruelty but necessity. If the threshold could be crossed easily, it would have no meaning. Only by struggle, by risk, by terror does the crossing become real. Baba Yaga's paradoxical nature, destroyer and benefactor, devourer and giver, makes sense in this context. She is not meant to be consistent. She is meant to embody the double nature of the threshold itself. To pass through is to die and to live, to lose and to gain, to suffer and to be renewed. She is terrifying because the threshold is terrifying, but she is also essential because without the threshold there is no transformation. To strip her of either aspect would be to strip her of her meaning. She is both the danger and the possibility, both the end and the beginning. The imagery of fire reinforces this. Fire consumes, but it also purifies. It destroys, but it also transforms raw food into nourishment, or into metal, night into light. Baba Yaga gives fire because fire is the perfect symbol of threshold power. To hold it is to hold life and death at once. The initiate who carries the skull of flame has passed through death and returned with its power. They have crossed the threshold and come back changed. They are no longer the same person who left. Her role as guardian is also tied to her liminality. She lives not in the village but not far beyond it, on the edge of the forest. She is part of society but outside it, feared but also sought out. This is exactly where a threshold guardian belongs, not fully in one world or the other, but on the border, enforcing the rules of passage. She is neither goddess nor human, neither wholly evil nor wholly good. She is the in-between, the figure who belongs only at the crossing point, and because of this, she is immortal in memory. As long as humans tell stories of transformation, there will be a need for a guardian of the threshold. The psychological dimension of this role is just as striking. In modern terms, Baba Yaga represents the confrontation with the unconscious, with the parts of ourselves that terrify us, that threaten to consume us, but also hold the key to our growth. To enter her hut is to descend into the depths of the psyche, to face the devouring mother, the shadow of fear, the chaos of the unknown. To survive is to integrate that experience, to return to consciousness with new strength. This is why her tales resonate not only as folklore, but as profound metaphors. They describe in mythic language what every human must endure: the confrontation with fear, the acceptance of mortality, the transformation that follows. Listeners who heard these tales around the hearth would have felt this truth even if they could not articulate it. They knew that growing up was hard, that survival meant facing dangers, that life demanded endurance. Baba Yaga's trials gave shape to this knowledge, turning the vague fears of childhood into vivid images of huts, ovens, bones, and fire. The stories taught that fear was not to be avoided but endured, that trials were not pointless but necessary, that the witch at the threshold was not only a monster but a teacher. The figure of Baba Yaga as guardian also explains why she is never finally defeated. Heroes and heroines escape her, outwit her, even burn her hut in some variations, but she always returns in the next story, unchanged, waiting in her forest. She cannot be destroyed because she is not an individual but a function, the embodiment of the threshold itself. As long as people grow, as long as they face death, as long as they pass through transformation, Baba Yaga remains. She is always waiting, always testing, always granting or devouring, depending on how she is faced. This endurance has kept her alive in culture long after many other figures faded. She is not bound to one story or one form. She is the guardian of the crossing, and every story that involves a crossing can call on her. This is why she appears in tales of heroes, maidens, fools, princes, anyone who dares to enter the forest. She is universal because the threshold is universal. Every person must face it, every life contains it. Baba Yaga is simply its face in Slavic form. Seen in this way, her terrifying features, iron teeth, skeletal frame, insatiable hunger, take on deeper meaning. They are the face of death itself, the unavoidable presence that awaits us all. But her gifts, fire, wisdom, magical aid, are the face of rebirth, the promise that death is not the end, but the passage to something new. She contains both, and she stands at the gate where the two meet. That is why she is unforgettable. That is why she endures. She is the guardian of the threshold, and no one can live a human life without passing her in some form, whether in story, in ritual, or in the inner journey of the soul. In the tangled forests and shadowed tales of Slavic folklore, Baba Yaga is not the only figure who commands terror and awe. Alongside her appears another presence, equally feared, equally uncanny, and bound just as tightly to the mysteries of death. This is Koshai the Deathless, a skeletal lord whose immortality is secured by the careful concealment of his soul. Together, they form a pair of figures who haunt the imagination of Eastern Europe, both guardians of thresholds, both embodiments of death and survival, yet standing in strange relation to one another. Sometimes they are allies, sometimes they oppose each other, sometimes they circle one another like twin constellations whose orbits never fully align. To explore Baba Yaga without considering Koshai is to leave her half unfinished, for his presence sharpens her own identity and reveals what she is and what she is not. Koshai's story is simple in outline, but endlessly strange in detail. He is called the Deathless because he cannot be killed in any ordinary way. His life is hidden, nested inside objects that are themselves hidden in a chain of impossible concealments. In the most familiar version, his soul rests in a needle, the needle within an egg, the egg within a duck, the duck within a hare, the hare within a chest, and the chest buried beneath a tree on a remote island. Only by breaking through this entire chain can the hero destroy him, and even then, it is not a straightforward victory. The image is unmistakable. Koshai embodies the indestructibility of death itself, the impossibility of overcoming mortality by force alone. His life is deferred, hidden, locked away, yet always present, always threatening to emerge. Like Baba Yaga, Koshai lives at the edge of the human world. He is often portrayed as a gaunt, skeletal man, sometimes chained in dungeons, sometimes riding across the land with terrifying speed. He kidnaps maidens, hoards wealth, imprisons the innocent. Yet he is also more than a mere villain. His power over life and death, his uncanny endurance, his association with hidden knowledge and magical objects, all of these link him to the same archaic stratum of belief that gave rise to Baba Yaga. He too may be the remnant of an older deity, transformed into a monstrous figure in a Christianized world. Where she is the crone, he is the deathless lord. Where she is the guardian of fire, he is the keeper of hidden souls. The question then is how these two figures relate to one another. In some tales, Baba Yaga aids the hero who seeks to defeat Koshai. She may provide advice, magical items, or directions to the island where his soul is hidden. In these stories, she acts as a counterweight to him, another figure of death, but one who allows the seeker to triumph by granting the necessary knowledge. Her role as tester and initiator becomes clear here. The hero cannot confront Koshai directly. He must first pass through Baba Yaga, endure her trials, gain her aid, and only then is he ready to face the Deathless One. In this structure, she is not Koshai's ally, but his complement. He represents the final challenge, she, the preparatory crucible. Together, they form the two halves of the journey, initiation and confrontation, trial and culmination. In other stories, however, Baba Yaga and Koshai seem aligned. Both are terrifying, both devour or imprison, both stand opposed to the hero's goals. In these variations, they appear less as individuals and more as parallel embodiments of the same principle. They are death personified in two forms, the crone who threatens to eat and the skeletal lord who cannot die. In this reading, the hero is not moving from one to the other, but confronting the same archetype twice, the multiplicity of death represented in different guises. Baba Yaga's hut and Koshchei's hidden chest are both liminal places, both thresholds where mortality is at stake. To overcome them is to overcome fear itself, and whether they act together or apart, they serve the same narrative role. The contrast between them is striking, and it illuminates their shared roots. Baba Yaga is female, ancient, rooted in the domestic tools of mortar, pestle, and broom. Koshchei is male, skeletal, rooted in the imagery of warriors, dungeons, and hidden treasures. She embodies the consuming, devouring side of death, the grave that swallows, the oven that bakes. He embodies the enduring, unyielding side of death, the body that does not decay, the soul that cannot be destroyed. Together, they cover the full spectrum of mortality, the inevitability of being consumed, and the impossibility of escaping. They are rivals only in the sense that they represent different faces of the same truth, and allies only in the sense that they enforce it together. The symbolic nesting of Koshchei's soul mirrors the layered thresholds of Baba Yaga's trials. Just as she demands that the visitor pass through impossible labors, so he demands that the hero penetrate impossible concealments. Both structures teach the same lesson. Life and death are not simple, not direct, but bound up in layers of challenge, hiddenness, and endurance. To succeed requires persistence, respect for hidden knowledge, and often the aid of allies gained through humility. Baba Yaga gives fire, Koshchei hides his soul. She represents what must be faced, he represents what must be uncovered. Both are initiations into the deepest truths of existence. There is also the question of their alignment with older deities. Koshchei's name and attributes suggest a link to chthonic gods of death and wealth, perhaps even to Veles, the Slavic god of the underworld and cattle, often portrayed as a trickster and opponent of Perun. Veles was associated with hidden treasures, serpents, and transformation, traits that resonate with Koshchei's indestructibility and his secret soul. If Baba Yaga is the memory of a goddess of cycles, then Koshchei may be the memory of a god of death and the underworld, both exiled into monstrous form as folklore adapted to new religious orders. Seen together, they are remnants of a divine pair, once balanced in myth, now distorted into witch and deathless lord. In some tales, the hero or heroine who survives Baba Yaga's trials does not destroy her, but earns her respect. She may even provide guidance in defeating Koshchei, lending her mortar and pestle or offering cryptic advice. This suggests a narrative logic in which she is the gatekeeper who must be respected in order to face the deeper danger. Only those who honor the guardian of the threshold are granted the chance to confront the deathless lord. Her role then is not opposition but preparation, ensuring that the unworthy never reach the final trial. Koshchei cannot be defeated without her, for she holds the knowledge of how to pierce his hidden soul. Listeners would have recognized this interplay instinctively. They knew that survival required respect for both the devouring forces of nature and the enduring inevitability of death. Baba Yaga represented the immediate danger, the famine, the fire, the predator in the woods. Koshchei represented the inescapable, the certainty of mortality, the persistence of decay. To face both was to confront the full spectrum of fear. The stories gave this truth a narrative form, one in which the hero could prevail, but only by passing through initiation, enduring trials, and uncovering hidden truths. Modern retellings often simplify the relationship, making Baba Yaga a villain to be escaped and Koshchei the ultimate monster to be slain. But the older tales resist such neat divisions. They place the two figures in a complex dance, sometimes opposed, sometimes aligned, always circling the same central mystery of life and death. To see them as rivals is to recognize their different aspects. To see them as allies is to understand their shared role. Either way, they are bound together in the folklore of the Slavic world, mirrors of one another, partners in terror, exiles from divinity whose shadows still stretch across the forest paths of story. When modern thinkers began to examine folklore not only as entertainment, but as the echo of inner life, they found in Baba Yaga a figure that reached far beyond Slavic forests. She was not only a witch or a goddess in exile, but also an image of the psyche, the embodiment of forces within the human mind that every person must confront. Carl Jung and his followers spoke of archetypes, universal images that appear across myths, dreams, and stories because they express truths of the unconscious. Among these archetypes, one of the most powerful is the terrible mother, the figure who devours, imprisons, and terrifies, yet who also contains the key to transformation. Baba Yaga fits this pattern with uncanny precision. She is the crone who threatens to eat the visitor, who surrounds herself with bones and fire, who sets impossible tasks, but also the one who grants wisdom, fire, and survival to those who pass her trials. She is terrible, but she is mother, and in this paradox lies her psychological power. The terrible mother archetype emerges from the same source as the nurturing mother. The figure who gives life, who sustains and protects, is also the one who has power to take it away. The womb that nurtures is also the grave that swallows. Every child knows this ambivalence instinctively. The mother is comfort and terror, safety and authority, love and discipline. In the psyche, this duality becomes projected outward into figures of myth and folklore. Baba Yaga is one of the clearest examples. She is the inverted mother, the one who cooks children rather than feeding them, who lives in a hut of bones rather than a home of warmth, who demands obedience not through kindness, but through fear. And yet, like every terrible mother, she does not exist to annihilate, but to transform. She destroys the childish self in order to bring forth the adult. In this sense, the journey into Baba Yaga's forest mirrors the psychological rite of passage that every individual undergoes. Childhood is a place of dependency, of innocence, of protection under the parental home. But to become an adult, the child must leave this safety and enter the unknown. They must confront fear, danger, and the possibility of death. In myth, this is dramatized as the encounter with the devouring witch, the ogre, the monster at the threshold. In psychology, it is the confrontation with the unconscious, with the fears and desires that lie beyond conscious control. The two are the same. To face Baba Yaga is to face the chaos of the inner world, the parts of the self that must be endured, acknowledged, and integrated in order to grow. The tasks she sets are metaphors for this process: sorting grains from dust, baking bread from spoiled ingredients, cleaning a house filled with invisible hands. These are not simply chores. They are symbolic acts of ordering chaos, of bringing discipline to the psyche, of transforming raw, confusing material into something structured and meaningful. The initiate cannot accomplish them alone because no one can transform the unconscious alone. They require the help of allies, represented by magical objects, wise dolls, animal friends. In psychological terms, these allies are the inner resources inherited from parents, culture, and intuition. Vasilisa's doll, given by her dying mother, is precisely this: the voice of ancestral wisdom, the internalized guidance of love that helps her navigate fear. The tasks, impossible without this aid, become possible through it. The psyche reorganizes itself, guided by the inner mother, until the chaos is sorted and the initiate emerges changed. The threat of being devoured is central to this initiation. Baba Yaga is always hungry, always sniffing the air for human flesh. To stand before her is to feel the certainty of being swallowed whole. Psychologically, this represents the fear of being overwhelmed by the unconscious, of losing oneself in chaos, of being annihilated by forces too vast to comprehend. Children feel this fear acutely, which is why the tales grip them so tightly. But the story teaches that this devouring is not inevitable. If the initiate shows respect, patience, and humility, they are spared. They are not destroyed but transformed. The terrible mother threatens to consume, but in sparing, she grants rebirth. The devouring becomes symbolic, not literal, and the child returns as something new. This is why Baba Yaga is not merely a villain, but an archetype. Villains can be slain or avoided. Archetypes cannot. They are eternal because they live within the human mind itself. Every culture has figures like her because every psyche has the experience she represents. The crone in the forest, the hag by the oven, the skeletal witch who tests and terrifies, they are masks of the same inner truth, that growth requires death, that transformation requires facing fear, that the mother is both nurturing and terrible. Baba Yaga's hut is not just in the forest, it is in the unconscious. To enter it is to enter the psyche's hidden chambers. To survive it is to emerge with fire, the symbol of renewed life and consciousness. The psychological map of Baba Yaga's tale also aligns with the structure of rites of passage described by anthropologists. Arnold van Gennep identified 3 stages in every initiation ritual: separation, liminality, and incorporation. First, the initiate is separated from their old life, cast into the wilderness, stripped of their former identity. Then they enter the liminal stage, where they are neither child nor adult, neither alive nor dead, suspended between worlds. Finally, they are reincorporated into society with a new status, transformed and renewed. Baba Yaga's story fits perfectly into this pattern. The hero or heroine is cast out into the forest, separated from home and family. They face the liminal trials in the hut, suspended between life and death, neither safe nor doomed. And they return with fire or wisdom, incorporated into the world anew as someone transformed. Folklore preserves in story what ritual once enacted in practice. For listeners, the psychological truth resonated even if they could not name it. Children identified with Vasilisa or other seekers, feeling the fear of being abandoned in the forest, the terror of facing the witch, the relief of receiving fire. Adults recognized the deeper meaning, the necessity of trials, the inevitability of fear, the value of wisdom gained through suffering. The stories spoke to both levels at once, entertaining with their grotesque images, but instructing with their archetypal truths. They reassured that fear could be survived, that death was not the end, that the terrible mother was not only a monster, but also a guide. Baba Yaga's image as the terrible mother also explains why she persists in modern culture. She appears in films, books, and games, not only because she is strange and frightening, but because she touches something universal. Every person carries within them the fear of being devoured, the need to face chaos, the hope of rebirth. Her hut on chicken legs, her bone fence, her blazing skulls are unforgettable symbols of this inner journey. They are the language of the unconscious translated into story. To confront her is to confront oneself, and that confrontation is never finished. This is why she always returns, always waits in the forest, always threatens, but also teaches. She is the eternal figure of the threshold within the human mind. When Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole, he described it as a confrontation with the unconscious, with shadow, with the archetypes that frighten and overwhelm. Baba Yaga is one of those archetypes. She is shadow and mother combined, devourer and guide, destroyer and creator. The psychological map of her stories is the map of individuation itself. The seeker enters the forest of the psyche, faces the witch, endures her tests, survives the threat of death, and returns with fire, the spark of wholeness. The journey is dangerous, but it is necessary. Without it, the self remains incomplete. With it, the self becomes transformed. Thus, Baba Yaga is not only a relic of Slavic folklore, nor only an echo of a goddess in exile. She is also a figure of the mind, an image of the deepest truths of human growth. She is the terrible mother who devours and spares, who terrifies and transforms, who guards the threshold and demands respect. Every listener who has ever trembled at her name has, in some way, walked the path into their own forest, faced their own devouring fears, and emerged changed. That is why her story never fades. It is not only about her, it is about us. For centuries, Baba Yaga lived in the forest of story, her hut spinning on chicken legs, her fence glowing with the skulls of the dead, her mortar and pestle grinding across the sky. She belonged to the world of oral tradition, carried from village to village, whispered at night by firelight, remembered in ritual fragments long after the groves had been cut down. But stories never stay still, and as folklore entered the age of print, performance, and modern media, Baba Yaga stepped out of the woods and into new forms. She became music, theatre, film, and eventually video games, her image transforming again and again to suit each age while retaining the core that made her unforgettable. To trace her in modern culture is to watch the endurance of a myth that refuses to vanish, adapting to every medium while carrying the same paradox of terror and wisdom. One of the earliest and most enduring modern appearances of Baba Yaga is in music, where her image became immortalized in Modest Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition. Written in 1874, this piano suite portrays a series of imagined artworks, each movement evoking a scene or character. Among them is The Hut on Fowl's Legs, Baba Yaga, a thunderous piece that captures the witch's furious motion, her rushing through the air, her chaotic energy. The music is relentless, hammering, almost violent, as though the piano itself becomes her mortar pounding the earth. When orchestrated by Ravel decades later, it gained even more intensity, the brass and percussion evoking her monstrous presence. For many who hear it, the movement is their first introduction to Baba Yaga, her name carried not by folk tales, but by the concert hall. Here she became not a witch of children's stories, but a symbol of primal, unstoppable force, a reminder that folklore can inspire not only fear, but art of the highest form. In literature and theatre, Baba Yaga moved from oral tale to printed story, carried by folklorists like Alexander Afanasiev, whose 19th century collections preserved dozens of her appearances. Writers of the Russian Silver Age drew on her image as a symbol of the mysterious, the uncanny, the primal forces of the land. Poets used her hut and her fence as metaphors for mortality, for thresholds, for the inescapable cycles of time. In Soviet times, she was sometimes softened into a comical figure in children's plays, a bumbling hag who threatened to eat children but was easily tricked. This transformation shows her adaptability. In one context, she remained terrifying, in another, she became humorous, but in both, she endured. Even when stripped of her full grandeur, she could not be erased. She was too strange, too unique, too deeply embedded in cultural memory to vanish. Film brought Baba Yaga into the realm of moving images. In Soviet cinema of the mid-20th century, she appeared frequently in fairy tale adaptations aimed at children. Often she was depicted with exaggerated features, long nose, crooked back, wild hair, cackling laugh. The special effects were simple, but the imagery was powerful enough to leave generations of children with indelible memories. In these films, She was sometimes menacing, sometimes comic, always larger than life. The camera captured her hut, spinning and creaking, the fence of bones looming in eerie forests, the witch herself flying across the screen in crude but imaginative depictions of her mortar and broom. These images cemented her as a cultural staple, a figure everyone recognized, whether they feared her or laughed at her. Outside of Russia, Baba Yaga's presence grew more fragmented, but no less potent. Western audiences encountered her in folklore collections, where she was often described as a cannibal witch, her deeper mythic layers left unexplored. Yet even in this simplified form, she fascinated readers, who found in her a figure stranger and darker than the more familiar witches of Western fairy tales. Unlike Hansel and Gretel's witch, who was destroyed in her oven, Baba Yaga could not be defeated so easily. She lingered, she returned, she commanded forces larger than herself. For readers hungry for something beyond the sanitized stories of children's books, she offered a taste of raw, untamed myth. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Baba Yaga entered the world of fantasy fiction, horror, and popular media. Authors reimagined her as a villainess in sprawling fantasy sagas, a mentor figure to heroes, a neutral force who might help or hinder depending on her mood. Comic books portrayed her as a grotesque sorceress, sometimes aiding demons, sometimes battling them. In these reinterpretations, she often lost her folkloric ambiguity and became a clearer antagonist, but the fascination remained. Writers returned to her again and again because she was unlike any other witch, not just old and cruel, but cosmic, tied to fire, time, and the cycles of life and death. She was a ready-made archetype for fantasy worlds that needed a figure both terrifying and unforgettable. Perhaps most striking is Baba Yaga's migration into video games, where her hut and her strange tools could finally be experienced in interactive form. In games inspired by mythology and fantasy, she appears as a boss to be fought, a quest giver to be bargained with, or a mysterious presence lurking in the forest. Designers seize upon the imagery of her hut on chicken legs, turning it into a moving fortress that stalks across the map, its grotesque legs scratching the ground as players approach. The mortar, pestle, and broom become weapons or magical devices, the skulls of her fence glowing in eerie digital light. In this medium, the player confronts Baba Yaga directly, experiencing the same trials and fears that folklore listeners imagined. The test of initiation becomes literal, the threshold crossed by pressing buttons and making choices. Even mainstream popular culture has invoked her name, often in unexpected ways. In the John Wick films, the assassin protagonist is nicknamed Baba Yaga, not because he resembles the witch, but because the name carries connotations of unstoppable terror, of a force that cannot be reasoned with, only feared. This usage is imprecise. Russians in the film even correct that the name means boogeyman, but it shows the spread of her reputation. Baba Yaga has become shorthand for dread, for implacable power, for the dark figure who waits in the shadows. Whether or not audiences know her folk tales, they know the name, and the name alone carries weight. Artists and musicians continue to reinterpret her as well. Visual art often portrays her hut looming in surreal forests, its chicken legs grotesque but strangely comic. Some artists depict her as monstrous, skeletal, terrifying. Others as majestic, almost divine, a crone of immense dignity. Musicians draw on Mussorgsky's legacy, composing new works that evoke her imagery, her movement, her paradox of horror and wisdom. In each medium she shifts, but the core remains the same: the hut, the bones, the flight, the tests, the fire. These are the symbols that cannot be erased, the essence of her myth carried forward into every new retelling. Why does Baba Yaga adapt so easily to modern media? Because she embodies something timeless. She's not tied to a single moral lesson, not bound to one story or one outcome. She is fear and gift, death and rebirth, threshold and transformation. These themes are as relevant in modern cities as they were in ancient villages. Audiences may not fear starving in the winter forest, but they know the terror of facing overwhelming trials, the uncertainty of thresholds, the lure of hidden wisdom. Baba Yaga speaks to these fears, and so she remains vivid no matter the medium. Her survival also reveals the endurance of folklore itself. Stories are never static. They move, they change, they find new forms. Baba Yaga began as a goddess in sacred groves, became a witch in folk tales, was softened into comic figures in children's plays, turned into music in concert halls, and now stalks across digital landscapes in games. Each transformation reshapes her, but each preserves the core of her paradox. She is eternal, not because she resists change, but because she embraces it, because she survives every retelling. For those who still tell her tales, Baba Yaga remains a reminder of the forest, the threshold, the danger that tests and transforms. For those who encounter her in films or games, she is a thrilling villain, a strange and unforgettable presence. For scholars, she is the exiled goddess, the terrible mother, the archetype of initiation. In every case, she is alive. She has never been confined to one role or one medium. She is as restless as her hut, always turning, always shifting, always waiting for the next traveler to come to her door, whether by foot on a forest path or by console and screen in a digital world. To speak of Baba Yaga is always to speak in contradictions. She is one of the few figures in world folklore who refuses to settle into a single role. She is a monster with iron teeth who devours children, but she is also the keeper of wisdom who guides heroes and heroines towards survival. She is a terrifying witch in the woods, but she is also the faint memory of a goddess, a once revered power reduced to exile yet still commanding awe. She is the crone who destroys, but she is also the mother who transforms, testing the weak, rewarding the worthy, embodying the paradox at the heart of human existence, that life and death, terror and renewal, cruelty and gift are inseparable. To encounter her is to encounter this paradox, and that is why she has never faded, why she remains one of the most enduring figures of Slavic imagination and beyond. The monstrous side of Baba Yaga is unforgettable. Her hut spins on chicken legs surrounded by bones, her oven threatens to roast the unworthy, her nose scratches the ceiling, her appetite is insatiable. She is grotesque, exaggerated, deliberately horrifying. Children hearing her stories felt the fear of being eaten alive, the terror of being lost in the forest, the dread of facing an adult's authority magnified into cannibalistic hunger. This fear was necessary. Folktales are not gentle comforts. They are instructions in survival, encoded warnings, ways of preparing young minds for the harshness of the world. Baba Yaga's monstrousness made the lesson unforgettable. To survive her was to learn endurance, respect, humility, and cleverness. Her horror was the crucible in which resilience was forged. Yet she is never only a monster. Unlike the witch of Hansel and Gretel, who is destroyed and gone, Baba Yaga endures. She is not slain, not erased, not reduced to a single defeat. She remains, waiting for the next traveler, the next story. This endurance points to her deeper identity. She is more than a narrative obstacle. She is an archetype, the personification of forces too large to destroy. She is hunger, death, time, transformation. These cannot be defeated. They can only be faced, endured, and, if approached with respect, survived. Her monstrous form is the mask through which these forces speak. To dismiss her as only a villain is to miss the paradox that makes her eternal. The goddess side of Baba Yaga is harder to see, obscured by centuries of fear and distortion, but it shines through in her attributes. She commands the riders of dawn, noon, and midnight, making time itself her servant. She grants fire, the essence of survival, the sacred flame that was once the heart of ritual. She lives on the border of the forest, the liminal space where sacred groves once stood, where humans met gods. She tests like an initiator, giving trials that echo the structure of rites of passage. She appears not as one, but as three, reflecting the ancient triad of the triple goddess. These are not the traits of a mere witch. They are fragments of divinity, pieces of a larger sacred figure whose worship has been forgotten, but whose memory lingers in story. In exile, this goddess became terrifying, stripped of her nurturing aspects and left with her most fearsome face. Yet even in this form she grants gifts. Vasilisa survives because Baba Yaga allows it, because the doll, the tasks, and the fire all lead her to transformation. Heroes who seek wisdom often pass through Baba Yaga, receiving advice, magical objects, or directions. Even when she threatens, she teaches. Even when she devours, she preserves the logic of initiation. This duality is not inconsistency. It is the core of the goddess archetype itself. The divine feminine in ancient myth was never simple. It was always both life and death, fertility and famine, blessing and curse. Baba Yaga preserves this truth in distorted form, embodying the paradox of the goddess who is both terrifying and essential. As an archetype, she transcends folklore and becomes a universal symbol. Jung's psychology shows her as the terrible mother, the devourer who threatens annihilation, but also the one who forces growth. To face her is to face the unconscious, the chaos that terrifies, but also transforms. Her hut is the psyche's threshold, her tasks the process of ordering inner chaos, her fire the spark of new consciousness. She lives not only in the Slavic forest, but in the human mind, in every dream of being pursued, devoured, tested, or saved. This is why she appears in so many cultures under different names, Morana, the Kailiach, Frau Holle, because she is not only a Slavic witch but an archetype of the human condition. The paradox of Baba Yaga is therefore threefold. She is monster, goddess, and archetype. Each role explains part of her, but none is sufficient alone. As monster, she terrifies and entertains, making children shiver while teaching them to respect danger. As goddess, she carries the memory of sacred cycles, the echoes of rituals long forgotten, the fragments of divinity that once ruled forest and fire. As archetype, she lives in every psyche, the eternal figure of death and rebirth, the terrible mother who tests and transforms. Together, these roles form her full identity. To reduce her to one is to misunderstand her. To embrace the paradox is to see her clearly. This paradox also explains her immortality in culture. A simple villain would fade when fashions changed, a forgotten goddess would vanish when her worship ended. But an archetype persists because it expresses something universal. Baba Yaga has lived for centuries because she is more than a character. She is a structure, a symbol, a pattern that repeats wherever humans confront fear, trial, and transformation. She can appear in folktales, in music, in film, in games, in psychology, and still be recognizable. Her form changes, but her essence remains. She is the hut on chicken legs, the skulls of fire, the crone of bones, the gift of survival. She is everything we fear and everything we need. When people call her monster, they are right. When they call her goddess, they are also right. When they see her as archetype, they reach the deepest truth. Baba Yaga is all of these at once because she is the paradox at the heart of existence. Life and death, terror and wisdom, cruelty and transformation are not opposites but halves of the same whole. Baba Yaga embodies this whole. She is the eternal paradox, waiting in the forest, always turning, always testing, never gone, never finished, never fully understood.